Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this meeting of Adults and Community Wellbeing. Before we start, there's no fire drill plans, so in the event of a fire alarm we'll exit out the rear doors. I'd like to welcome Wendy Bokit here, our Executive Counsellor for Adult Care. Welcome, Wendy. And everybody else, I'll introduce you as we come to the agenda items. So to start with, apologies, please, Emily.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Sarah Parkin and Glenn Garrett.
Thank you. Declarations of members' interest. If anything becomes obvious throughout the meeting that a member has an interest, please let us know. We'll go on to item 3, minutes. I just want to talk about the minutes first. There's one comment in the minutes which I will bring up, which I'm not convinced is quite phrased in an appropriate way, which is to do with fast food outlets on... it talks about the committee. The committee considered the options available to restrict the density of fast food outlets in some communities, including through planning regulations and local saturation zones for alcohol and fast food outlets. My view was that the committee didn't actually really get involved in that. It was in Derek's report of fast food outlets being an issue relating to obesity. My personal view is fast food outlets do not cause obesity. If you choose to indulge every meal that you want in a fast food outlet, that might contribute, but that's your choice. And the other thing is, not all fast food, there's plenty of fast food is about actually not waiting 20 minutes, half an hour for your food. It's about getting it quite quick, and you can have healthy fast food. So my view is, that's Derek's comment, not the committee's comment, because I don't recall anybody really sort of making we didn't sort of get into that. And I'm not, my view is Public Health England hasn't done enough over the last few years on obesity, and actually don't blame the fast food culture. So we'll just turn that into Derek's view, purely Derek's view. Okay, are we all happy with that? And are we all happy with the minutes? Any other comments? All supported? Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposed by Tracy, second by Andrew. And all in favour? Brilliant. Thank you. Announcements. Glenn has sent his apologies. Fortunately, he's had to go away today. So, but we have the full team here, and so I see no issues there. And so on that note, I'm going to just re-alter the agenda because unfortunately Elena has got slightly delayed, and therefore we will go with item 7 first, performance report. So, and David has transformed into Caroline, who is here to represent and give the performance report. So welcome, Caroline, and we'll let you just say what you want to say.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. So yeah, the performance report is page 63 onwards in your report. So I think we would hopefully agree that it shows actually really quite a positive picture, obviously in quite a challenging current year. We show that we have 2 measures that are exceeding their target. You'll remember that our measures are dictated around targets and tolerances that are set at the beginning of the year. Looking to improve performance or maintain performance where it's particularly challenging. We have 11 measures that have achieved their target, 4 that have not achieved, and 2 that we don't report until quarter 4 because they're annual survey measures. So what I'll do is briefly go through, because all of this obviously is in the report and it's all on the council website as well in terms of all of the detail and the narrative. But I'll quickly summarise. In terms of the 2 measures that are exceeding their target, the first one relates to permanent admissions to residential and nursing care homes for those aged 65 plus. Although we have seen an increase in Q2, it still remains below the target. We are likely to see an increase in Q4. This is mainly because there is a data lag in recording in our case management system, and as we catch up towards the end of the year, ready to do our statutory returns, we will likely see some small increase in that. The second measure that's achieving its target is where we have requests for support from new clients where the outcome was either no support or low level support. So where we've offered them alternatives to packages of care. A small drop was seen this quarter, but we're still exceeding our target. So showing a really positive picture to support people early on in their journeys. The measures that are within tolerance and target, so those that are shown with the green tick within the report, we have 3 that are around safeguarding. We've talked many times previously around the safeguarding. This is showing a positive picture around those safeguarding cases that are supported by an advocate where that's appropriate, which we would always encourage and support. Where we have safeguard inquiries that are concluded where the desired outcomes of the individual were achieved. And also the percentage of people who were asked what their outcomes. It's very important that we understand what it is the individual would like to see achieved, and therefore ensuring that when we do adult safeguarding inquiries that those questions are asked. So a positive picture around those measures around safeguarding. We also have another set of measures where again we're seeing a positive impact in terms of achieving their targets. They relate to adults receiving a direct payment. Also the completed episodes of reablement care for people in their own home is achieving target, along with those remaining home 91 days after a hospital discharge. Those adults who've been supported to improve their outcomes following a wellbeing intervention, so again early intervention showing a really positive picture. And also we're achieving our target around emergency and urgent deliveries and collections of equipment being completed on time. So again, all key factors in enabling people to be supported in their own home. We've also seen good performance around people maintaining their accommodation via housing related support services. And also we've seen a positive impact around those being offered and receiving an NHS health check. So all those are showing a really positive picture, as you'll have seen throughout the report. There are some areas that are not performing in line with the target and tolerances that we have set. The first one of those is around those people in receipt of long-term support where they've had a review. Now we know that we have obviously had been having a real focus on undertaking those annual reviews or those reviews when there's been a significant change. Specialist adult services is consistently performing high in this area, and adult frailty are working very hard to have improved their performance from last quarter, and they're looking to projection is that they will achieve the target by the end of the year. So an improving picture, even though currently we are not achieving the targets we've set ourselves. And we also know that looking at comparison to other local authorities, we're performing very well. In terms of carers supported in the last 12 months, whilst we haven't achieved our target, there does continue to see improvement in this area. There have been changes to the definition and what's counted as support. We are confident through work we've done that the carers that are known to us are receiving substantial support from us. We do see obviously a fluctuation in referrals because they are self-referrals. The national census has shown a reduction in the number of people who are self-identifying as carers across the country, which could be having an impact. There is a new contract around carers which will be mobilised in October, and the 2 providers are engaged to deliver upon this. We've also relaunched the Carers Delivery Partnership, which is chaired by Councillor Sneath, and this brings together numerous organisations. A report is going to the Health and Wellbeing Board regarding the delivery plan for this. And there'll be a full report to scrutiny in December. The other 2 measures that aren't performing within the tolerance relate to support for alcohol users and also those quitting smoking. One U Lincolnshire has continued to see the complexity around alcohol cases increase, which has seen our completion rates come down. They have had some recruitment issues as well, but there is a plan in place to address this. Smoking services continue to be impacted by COVID, However, Lincolnshire is ranked 5th nationally for overall quitters, which compares to a ranking of 10th in 2019 when One U Lincolnshire took over the contract. So we are seeing obviously an improvement. As I said, full narratives for all the measures are found in the report and on the council website. I'll now hand over for any questions.
Yeah, thank you. My question is about carers supported. In my job, I see a lot of wonderful work that carers do, and it's really particularly to do with young carers that I'm asking you. It does say that tighter definitions as what counts as support has come in. Could you sort of tell us what sort of things we're doing? You have said that a full report's coming to scrutiny in December. I've just made a note of that.
Yeah.
But I have a real concern about young people who juggle everything and have to look after other people in the family. So could you tell us what sort of things that this tighter definition include? Thank you.
I can certainly get the full detail for that. In terms of young carers, we are now including them in this information. We have a young carers register that we keep within Children's Services. So we identify those through work we do with whether that's through identifying them through some of our early help, through our other interventions or through school support, where we identify who those young carers are. I will then I know Sem's not here today, Sem Neil, but I will then get a full list of the support that's offered to young carers specifically and pass that back through if that's okay. Apologies.
Yes, that's great, thank you. And obviously it's going to be covered in the full report anyway, I assume. But I think most people would have particular concerns over young carers because of the...
And appreciate the report's not till December, so make sure I get that to you in the next, imminently.
Thank you, thank you.
Trevor?
Thanks, Chairman. Good report. Colin, the review, what constitutes a review? I note in the report that the percentage around the long-term placement, so I would take it that that's residential nursing, as opposed to short-term, which would be
home
maybe,
care or some
home care,
additional
direct
support,
payments, so I'd like to know in terms of what constitutes a review, and also it's understanding that in terms of the indicator really, the page 65, the request for support for new clients where the outcome was no support or support of a lower level, the actual is 97%, target's 93, which suggests that that's a good performance, but it's really understanding what in terms of what that means. Is that new clients requesting social care and being signposted out because they don't meet the criteria?
And we to offer them signposting to other services where we don't need to do a full assessment and there isn't a care package needed. Actually, there's other support, whether that's within a voluntary organisation or a community setting. It might be some information that they can access online. So it's actually about they don't actually need an intervention, they need some additional information and signposting elsewhere. And that's, so we're not providing services that aren't actually needed. And there's that's the criteria around that measure. In terms of reviews, obviously we set an annual review for clients, but obviously where there is a change in their care package, then we undertake a review as part of that change. And so by mandatory, they get an annual review, but obviously should that change, then we do a review at that point as well.
And is that desktop or is it face-to-face? Or is
I think it can be various kind of things. Afsane probably wants to come in. Apologies, Chairman.
Good morning. The reviews are, the majority of the reviews are face-to-face. So we will go to, if it's a package in community, we visit in their homes. If it's in residential home or nursing home, we go and see them in their environment. But because of the pressures, for instance, if we need to support the hospitals and it's not possible to do a face-to-face review, we do a risk assessment, and if it's safe to do a review with like a video call, WhatsApp call or phone call, we will basically go for that option.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, did you want to come back?
Yeah, sorry for Andrew's, the young carers. Children's Services do a lot with the young carers. They give them days out, help, like in school holidays, making sure that they don't miss out school trips and things like that. So they do a lot. And as you say, the report is coming back. But with being involved with Children's Scrutiny, before I took this role on, they do a real lot with the young carers and above and beyond, really. So be assured that they do look after them.
Thank you. Tracy?
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I've got 4 or 5, but they're small, so I'll put them all into one if that's all right, Caroline. On page 64, yes, obviously we've exceeded targets in regards to the permanent admissions. Where does that target actually come from? Because we're quite a way off, so it would be understanding where that target comes from on there. On page 65, I'm not going to touch on the point that Trevor did, because I know each time I have an issue with this PI, so I'm going to park that for this meeting. But also in regards to the direct payment, I would imagine that we would want to achieve more direct payments for people. So when is that target of 42% going to be reviewed? 71, extremely positive, obviously, in regards to that target there, with everyone remaining at home after the 91 days. So that's excellent. So that's really good. Number 74, the people supported to maintain their accommodation. It would be good to understand what that support looks like, how involved it is, so we can truly understand what Framework are doing for us. And obviously through yourself, Chairman, I personally would welcome a similar report that we had to the alcohol service from Framework brought to the committee, so we all have an understanding of what they do. But obviously that's just a suggestion from there. Just 2 more. On page 75 and 77, it's possibly touching a little bit on what Andrew was saying. Both of these targets, one we've kind of just scraped, the other one we didn't, in regards to the carers. We need clearly to shift our view of the importance of carers, so kind of a bit of feedback about what's in place to actually improve our role towards the carers on there. And one final one, just a comment on the second bullet point on 76. Obviously, yes, of course, in regards to the alcohol use, but the statement, this has prevented many lower level clients requiring the substance misuse treatment, that's creating a longer term issue. So it's something we need to strongly monitor. And again, any comments on that? And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, in terms of the target setting, so target setting is undertaken annually. It's a combination of the performance team. We work with each of the assistant directors responsible for the measures, and we look at statistical neighbour comparisons, we look at England average, and we look obviously to achieve at least in line with those, but we look at our own performance as well and look at what is reasonable and what we can achieve within the resources that we have. There's a full rationale that's then signed off by, obviously, the exec director, by Glenn, and then that also comes through to executive DLT for sign off in terms of those targets. Ultimately, it is about being, as a minimum, in the same level of achievement as similar authorities to ourselves. So that's how we set the targets. We do that annually. So the 42% around direct payments, again, we work very closely with someone like Pam from the finance to look at, what realistically will we look to achieve in terms of direct payments. So they will be reviewed coming up for the year coming up for 23-24. So that's how we kind of do the target setting process. In terms of the accommodation, certainly we'll take that back and also look, I'm sure Chairman will take back around the report, but I will also take back in terms of when we report in Q4 to have some of that explanation within the narrative of that measure around actually what does that mean in terms of what support are we actually giving those people. Carers, as I say, there is a report coming to committee. SEM has provided some detail for me around, as I say, obviously the new contract being launched, but also around the Carers Delivery Partnership. and hopefully those further reports going forward will give more detail about how we are obviously looking to improve those kind of carers measures. In terms of the lower level clients around substance misuse, again, Lucy wants to come in at that point.
If that's all right, Chairman, I'll just respond to that one. I absolutely take Councillor Carter's point, and actually as part of the recommission, so we're in the process of recommissioning the specialist We Are With You Drug and Alcohol Service at the moment. As part of that recommissioning process, we've done a really thorough review of the work we're doing around prevention and treatment of alcohol, and we need to make sure that moving forward that the various services we've got on offer work kind of hand in glove together to make sure that no one falls through the gap and we've got the right support available for people at the right time around their alcohol use.
Thank you. Okay. Got Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Thanks, Chairman. I won't make my usual comments about achieving targets in substance misuse, because I've made that many times before. The one I wanted to pick out was PI 33, people aged 40 to 74 offered and received an NHS health check. Now, I note that they are invited every 5 years. I was just wondering, is any more done above just sending a letter to people every, periodically? Is any other publicity done through comms to encourage people to take up that offer?
I think Alina wants to.
Morning, my name's Alina Hackney. I'm Head of Commercial Services and got responsibility for a lot of the management of the contracts you're referring to. In relation to health checks, obviously with COVID of the last 3 years, the kind of health check programme has been really quite affected. So certainly the last 6 months we've been working closely with GPs, so that uptake does actually increase. Also, the arrangements are currently being reviewed around health checks as well. We hear lots of reports in terms of where you are in the county that service can be different. So I think in terms of the new arrangements, they're looking at a wider offer, so it not necessarily being through the GPs, but that service as a whole has been hugely affected with COVID, which is probably explains some of the reason why the take-up is lower than normal. Sorry.
Welcome, and no worries for being slightly delayed. So nice to see you here anyway.
Thank you.
Just on that, just thinking about it, I wonder if they invite you to a health check and then if you don't go or don't make it or you can't make it, I don't really think they get round to actually inviting you back for a second go. So it might be that to get the figures up, could be that they need to. I know I've been invited for one and I know I didn't do it, and I also know I haven't actually seen one at all of late, so it might be that they do a one shot, and if you don't do it, actually you don't get invited back, and it's left a bit vague. So it could be something to just look into, maybe.
Yeah, and they're only paid based on the number of health checks they receive. Anyway, the GP surgeries, but as I say, there's a programme in place in terms of stepping that back up. It is inconsistent. There are some GPs really, really very good on this. There are others less so. A lot of it comes down to some of the resources in the GPs' practices, and as I say, that's been really affected in recent times. And sorry, Mr. Chairman, just one extra comment I think is really relevant, and it's back to Councillor Carter's point. The carer service, it's in mobilisation period. That's why the targets are not as high as where you'd expect them to see. It's within the first 4 months of the new arrangement, and it's a very different service that's actually in place. So that's quite normal. However, the point absolutely still stands, and obviously our priority as a service is to work with that. You would expect to see challenges in the first 18 months, but Caroline did reference the new contract. It is in mobilisation, and it has had some quite significant challenges from the outset.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Mike Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 77, we go back to carers. I know a number of questions have been asked and there's been good answers. The question I want to put to you, of those carers, how many as it were, on the books and receive a payment for that particular task, and how many are voluntary, receive no payment, and maybe occasionally get a backup? Because it's always mentioned in the press that there are thousands, if not millions, of carers at home receiving no payments, excuse me, at all to assist them in their act of caring. Thank you.
There is an element that it's not just about payment, it's about, in effect, support. So, and we're only often as good as people actually come forward. Not everybody wants to, they're quite happy and don't sort of need any services from the council from a carer's perspective. But actually, if they do come forward, then we pick them up. But if they don't actually choose to come forward, we'll always be down on numbers a bit. Any comments? That's as I take it. Yep. Hold on, your mic's gone off. Caroline, can you just knock your microphone off, please? There you go.
It's okay. I'm on Tango 2. It's regarding support. It covers a multitude of areas. Could I have a short explanation as to what that support would be, to clarify in my own mind? Because obviously, if someone's going into a house to help that person with the caring situation, I fully understand that. But then you say that you're giving reviews and you're offering support that way. But what support are we actually offering? Thank you.
Has anybody got an answer? I mean,
I think that's the same question that I asked Mr. Chairman, and that we're hoping to get some more information on. So, thank you.
well, ironically, the carers is coming back. Well, we've just delayed it actually because the contract's been renewed.
That's right.
And so it has been modified to adapt to, in effect, changing needs and where we want it to go. And that's only just started, and it was coming next month, on our next committee meeting, but we have delayed it because it won't have been long enough in the new contract to really get a feel and hands-on for the direction of travel that we want. If you want to know exactly what a carers get, I would suggest you have a look on the website, because in theory that's exactly where it should be to tell you the basic information of what is given. But it is pretty much aligned to needs of people, I think would be fair to say. So younger carers have a different need to older carers, and the level of support that's needed varies. I think we still do respite in some sense for carers and other bits, and it depends what that carer needs. And I suppose the assessment is in effect making sure that we are covering the needs of the carer. Would be I think, if I can summarise that as best as I can. Okay, is that all right, Mike?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to explore the measure on page 64, which is the permanent admissions in residential and nursing care being, the target, the actual being obviously quite a bit under the target, which actually is a good thing, because obviously, I'm guessing we always know that residential care is sort of the last option really after everything else. But in terms of, obviously, there's a linkage between activity and cost. So I'm guessing that if the activity is significantly down in admissions to residential care, that there's going to be a cost saving there. But I'm also right in assuming that potentially the reason why that is down is maybe due to the success of some of our downstream activities, which are obviously designed to keep people out of residential care. So by correlation, I'm guessing there may then be overactivity in those other areas, and obviously an impact on cost there. And ultimately coming round to it, and I'm pleased Pam's here, that potentially will this have an impact upon budgets? Will there have to be some kind of budget reprofiling if, you know, because obviously our movement is towards, you know, intervention activities early on, which are better for the client in terms of their care. It's also better for us because it doesn't cost us as much. So I'm just wondering what the overall impact is, because obviously, you know, one area, but it's going to have an impact elsewhere. Thanks.
Okay, Pam?
Yeah, so the budget that we bought, was that in the last month? The budget that we bought does include a shift in 23-24 from our cost base, moving away from that longer term support into other services that we've broadened. So if we think things like the extra care that we're investing our capital in, things like our reablement service, so our 23-24 budget that's just gone through council does reflect absolutely that cost shift. I think we need to be aware it varies depending on what service that we're looking at, and it links quite well to the paper that we'll be presenting onto the agenda. If we look at adult specialties compared to the older adults, yes, on the older adults market we have seen a significant variation in those entering residential care, predominantly impacted through COVID-19. We saw a big drop off in those entering residential care in the over 65s. We are seeing our activity levels return back to pre-pandemic levels. So what you can see in front of you is, to be fair, a timing challenge for us. We are seeing more people now entering residential care back to pre-pandemic levels. But we do monitor it month in, month out. The cost changes, both from our service changes, whether that is planned through our transformation programme, then we build that into the budgets. Yes, our savings that we've got within our budgets for 23-24 are predominantly delivered on that shift from residential care. So yes, we do build those in, Councillor Whittington, and into the ETFP on the longer term.
So I'm guessing potentially your activity might be going down, so there might be a saving there, but I'm just saying that if the activity is going back up again, then potentially, we know all the cost pressures that are out there, presumably some of the increase in budget might be due to an increase in activity, going back up to its pre-COVID levels, but some potentially might be due to an increase in unit cost. So I'm guessing you have to bear both of those in mind in the overall forecasting.
Yes, that's right. So when we brought the budget paper, we split it into unit cost increases and increases in demand. And we are able to say whether the reduction in residential is being seen then in home care or CSL, depending on whether it's specialties. So the budgets that we set and the forecast that we do 4 years forward looks at those trends across all of our services. And if we do see a shift in residential, we then see actually what does that look like in home care, CSL. Have we got our right level of capital for the investments in broadening those housing options? What are our priorities for some of the work we do with Asani, just and commercial? You know, have we got the contract levels right for reablement? All of these things then form that budget that came to council back in January, I think that was.
And if I can just add to what Pam said, direction of travel is very much about reducing the number in long-term care. So what we're building at the moment is more around into the community. So we've increased the capacity around the reablement, whether that's your home or whether that's bed-based. You know, the initiatives that are coming in line through the intermediate care layer is much more focused around community-based offer than residential. But residential, the reason you've seen that drop is largely due to COVID. And as Pam says, that started to creep back up. But the kind of infrastructure moving forward is much more around the community and supporting individuals in different various schemes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nikki Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just, I just want to pick up on PI 33 again, and it's just an observation actually, and hoping that maybe you can take something back from my comment. I just felt that the target was rather low, given the fact that we very often discuss preventative work alongside illness within this scrutiny panel, and hoping actually to lessen the burden on the NHS with preventative looking out for illness, if you like. So I was just a bit concerned that the target was rather low, and would hope that you'd look to expand on that and possibly look at the age range there. It's 40 to 74. Well, often, you know, you're going to find issues around health, many of which we're going to discuss today, are going to start below that. And so if we're looking at preventative and help and less of a burden on the NHS, then surely that should be looked at, and more people should be invited for a health check. Thank you.
I'm really sorry, this isn't my paper, so I haven't actually got the paper in front of me, so I don't actually, was it just the health checks is being reviewed currently. That's something that is being recommissioned, so we're expecting the kind of offer to look really different. I'm sorry if that doesn't completely answer your question, but as I say, it's not my item, but just to give you assurance, you know, health checks is long overdue in terms of the model, what it looks like. It's kind of looked like that for many, many years. So I do expect to see changes, and we'll be back in here very soon explaining what that model looks like.
That's good. Yeah, Andrew?
I was just going to add, reading your report, we seem to be doing, although the target's low, perhaps too low, we seem to be doing better than just about most other places, which is a sad reflection on other areas, probably.
Absolutely. And then, you know, there's been a lot of investment going from the council, because obviously previously wasn't something that the council managed. So we've done a lot of work with GPs over the last 3 years, but it needs to be, the model needs to be, you know, at the moment it's just through a GP setting. And I think there's aspirations with our colleagues within public health that offer needs to be much more flexible and wider so the general community can access it.
Well, that's exactly the problem, is you get a letter and if you don't deal with it, it's forgotten and binned. And then the next thing is you've got to find time to take off work to go and see a GP. And it's just, it's a clunky process. And you're right, why can't you go to a chemist on a Saturday and actually have a quick health check? It's not that big a task, but it's a good thing. It should be a very easy, accessible system, and that what it isn't, which is why people like me haven't done it really. But then I often go to a GP randomly, and hopefully keep going. So, right, Tracy. If you wanted to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. Just during the whole report, we mentioned GPs on, I think, 2. I don't know who to talk to before Alina's getting it all, and it's nothing to do with that. GPs are mentioned twice during the report. So the smoking one, which is behind target, and then also the dreaded PI 33. I guess I'm feeling parochial. I'm thinking, what's my GP doing in my area? So, for example, you know, can we actually start to receive some of that result? Which GPs are performing? Which GPs are sending people for referrals for the smoking? Which GPs are sending the letters out and following up in regards to these health checks that, yes, we would all like to see the uptake more. Because I wonder if that may possibly strive others to actually start improving, because just seeing the results collectively, I don't think gives us a picture, particularly for each of our own areas. So yeah, thank you.
Just on that, my GP has actually been pinging me text messages all about One New Lincolnshire, which I'm really pleased about, because actually that shows slickness, modernness becoming into the system. It perhaps needs to do it more than just once, because a text message tends to come and soon gets buried. But and I was talking to Glenn about it actually, and it does show, but what we don't have is total control over GP practices, and nor can we just and not everybody's at the same level, and some areas they have a different focus than others. But I think it does highlight that actually they are using modern communication methods now, which is a lot better, cheaper as well. Yeah.
Can I just come back on that? I mean, the ICB and the ICP are working with your doctors at the moment to try and get the service more regulated within every doctor, because they don't all do health checks. We know we have tried to get them all signed up to it, but they don't all do that. Same smoking and things like that. Some doctors will be really good at it, some doctors won't. And I think that's what the ICB is really trying to do at the moment, is trying to work with the doctors to try and get more of a regulated pattern across the county.
Elena?
In addition to that, in my world, it was kind of unregulated in terms of it was almost they got a payment. And in actual fact, since those commercial arrangements sit with the council, we have introduced so they get paid by a health check, so no longer do they get a standard payment. We are in recovery with the GPs now. I think, there was huge regard that during COVID, it was a really challenged period for them. So we've gone back into recovery with GPs, so we are setting expectations. There are improvement plans in place. So everything Councillor Carty said in terms of how do we ensure that is now back in place. We are back in recovery and making sure what they've signed up to is being delivered. It's not going as fast as we like, but, understandably, in terms of primary care, is under huge pressure. But those expectations are set with GPs and they're paid accordingly.
Thank you. Karen, Councillor Karen Lee.
Thanks. I just wanted to come in about the health checks. Like you, I get I get pinged a text from my GP to say, would you like a health check? And I have to say, if I hadn't got that, I wouldn't have thought of going for it, even me, because I think my health's all right. But a year ago, I did go, and part of our health check is a blood test. I mean, they could do a blood test in a chemist, it's not difficult, but I had a blood test, and I didn't get the results. I had to ring and chase them. They didn't ring me. And it turned out my cholesterol was a little bit high. And they said, oh, you don't need anything. But I chased it at work. I spoke to someone because I work on a cardiac ward, and they said to me, really, you do need to be on a low-dose statin. So I went back to the GP and said, I want a low-dose statin. And they gave me one because I'm quite insistent about things. And it's actually cut my cholesterol, my LDL, in half. So, that's prevented heart disease in me in the future. So that tells you just how important. And I wouldn't have gone for that check unless they'd come to me, because I feel all right. But it's invisible, isn't it, sometimes? So I think it's really important, and I think it's really quite important as well that we monitor sort of what they're finding, what sort of disease they're finding for the future. Thank you.
No, I mean, you're right, and at least it's coming back, and at some point it'll come back to here, but it's about making it accessible and easy to do, and it is very, where's the old saying come from, nip it in the bud. But, right, Councillor Mark Whittington.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. On the health checks as well, it is interesting because I know we discussed this previously. Because I said at the point that I'd never received anything from my GP. And I did actually inquire. And he said, oh, well, I have an annual hypertension check anyway. So he said, oh, all we do is we just roll it up as part of that. Okay, that's great. But sometimes it's communication. Because every year I have a blood test as part of that review. I have my blood pressure taken. In fact, I wear a blood pressure watch now all the time. But obviously there's stuff the GPs do, but what link do we then have with the NHS? Because a couple of weeks ago I hit 60, and my wonderful present from the NHS that they contacted me with was, you are now eligible for a bowel cancer test, which is fantastic, brilliant. But I'm just wondering, how much linkage do we have GPs with what the NHS is doing? Because it seems to me that everybody is doing the right thing, but is there a central place that sort of, goes all to say, well, he or she, they've had their health check, they've had their bowel cancer, because it just seems to be that if it's split between different bodies, there's a chance that things may not be coordinated.
Well, it's coming back, so I think we'll look forward to when that comes back, and I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit of debate on that subject when it does come back. Right, Councillor Marianne Overton.
Thank you. I wonder if I'm trying to find the target that will tell me that we are responding to needs, social care needs for adults who are living at home, and that we're providing the services that they need quickly enough before they get to need, say, a CPN or anybody else gets called out in emergency, when actually they haven't even got the social care basics in place. This is an instance that came to me yesterday, and I'm just looking for how do we measure that that's being adequate, the responses are quick enough and thorough enough and nothing's been left out, so the person is able to work well at home and not get into a desperate state. Thank you. I don't know where the target is.
Yeah, I suppose.
Caroline.
I suppose thinking about there's obviously a number of aspects that go to identify that person's needs that we maybe don't necessarily have reporting on. So thinking around, has the assessment or that initial conversation and assessment been done in a timely manner so that their needs are understood, and then those needs might lead to some either lower level support or no support, but actually if they do then have support, what was delivered in terms of, are they waiting for that service? So have they received home care in a timely manner? We do have that intelligence. It's not sat at a key performance indicator level. That's intelligence that is used within the service areas to look at their overall clients and say, have we got clients that are waiting? What are they waiting for? Is it that they need some equipment? We've got some really good, obviously, statistics around the delivery of equipment being very timely. So we know that if they do need some equipment in their own home, that's done in a timely manner. But in terms of those other aspects, that is the individual teams, so Afsane's teams, Justin's teams will have that. So to understand, are our clients receiving the assessment and support and then review in a timely manner?
Thank you. I feel we should have something that comes to
this.
I think we should have a measure that tells me that. So I could say, well, I know this was one example where we obviously didn't get things quite right, but the overall picture is positive. And I don't know if we can work out a measure. Maybe the office could think about that.
Well, what we'll do is we'll put that, Simon, if you make a note of that, we will look at maybe whether it's an agenda item or whatever it is. But I think there is there should be a report which says that somebody has approached adults for help and actually an outcome from it and how well it's been done and and all the rest. But these aren't just the only KPIs either. There's other sort of reporting mechanisms. So I think it's just in some sense, in fact, we had it, not this session, but where there's that many indicators technically in the system, it's actually, if we're not careful, we take them all on, we'll just drown in performance indicators. And so there's been a bit of a selection process to which ones we want and also which ones the council wants in its corporate approach. So, Wendy?
We do have the numbers who actually ring our call line. And obviously the ones that do go on to have help and the ones that don't, we do have those figures. But I mean, if you've got an incident that you need help on, then please just email us and we will get you some answers on there if there is an issue, because I don't believe we do have an issue in Lincolnshire.
Great, thank you.
But it is that there is a lot, and I think it's just that we can't deal with them all, but let's just have a revaluation and ask that question of appropriateness.
That's great. So it would be to Caroline.
Well, we will speak with Glenn at our next meeting when we speak with Glenn, and then Glenn will work with Caroline on it. We won't duplicate. We'll just make sure it's in effect. There perhaps is a mechanism which we can just get, which will answer your question quite easily.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you for the help. I will take up the individual case as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, good.
So, okay, I've got. We're getting quite long on this, but it just shows when this comes at the beginning of the agenda, it gets a million questions, and when it's at the end, it's quicker. But it's nice to thrash through the performance report without ever being under time. I've got Mark. Mark, did you want to come back, or is it? And I've got Trevor. You're done, eh? Right.
Chairman, just a very quick one on that one. I think the performance measure is 28 days from point of request for support to assessment.
So, okay. And I've got a question, which is now, my screen's gone off, turned off, but page, I think it's 78, which is to do with the smoking, and I see that the NHS is setting up smoking sort of cessations or something on their long-term plan, in-house tobacco treatment services, which in effect starts to duplicate what we're already doing with One New Lincolnshire. What are they doing? Are they sort of setting up, or have they got them set up? They does talk about maternity. Wasn't quite sure whether it was Lincolnshire focused or more a national picture of what they're doing. And it's was page 78. The development of the NHS long-term plan in-house tobacco treatment service is ongoing, and both the maternity and mental health services are now operational. Where we've got One New Lincolnshire. And I know it's not, that's technically not to do with performance, but it does just seem that there is a bit of a starting to get overlapping, which maybe is a good thing in some areas, but maybe it's also duplications, which is not necessary.
I can come back in on that one. So we do work really closely with colleagues from the ICB to make sure that we've got, that we avoid duplication where possible, and where we've got services running in parallel that are looking to support people with the same challenge over around stopping smoking, that they kind of work hand in glove, and that we are avoiding duplication. They will focus on a cohort of patients who at a particular point in time where it might be a bit of what we'd call a teachable moment, where it might be a good opportunity to engage them there and then with some support around smoking cessation. So I know my colleague Andy is working really closely with the ICB to make sure that where we do have kind of multiple offers, that they are not just duplicating but adding value.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you go to maternity, there's no reason why you couldn't have a poster up with One New Lincolnshire here and directing them. But and my final one really is to do with the other county areas. When we look at comparisons, do we sort of analyse, in effect, who's doing what better, and if there's any sort of things that we can learn from what they do. And sometimes I know it's difficult because some accelerate. When you try and look at it across the board, there is some that accelerate in other areas, and you think, oh, they're doing well, and then you get about another 3 items later and they're at the bottom of the pile, and I think so there is perhaps, is there a sort of something that can be gained from it, the comparison?
So in all the recommissioning programmes, there's always benchmarking that is undertaken as part of the review. Okay, so that will look at our neighbouring authorities, or it'll look at similar authorities to ourselves. But on an ongoing basis, when in contract, that's something that the contracts officer will do as part of their intelligence gathering. So in answer to your question, yes, that is already built into existing practice.
So, brilliant, thank you. Okay, well, on that note, thank you very much, Caroline, and thank you for stepping into number 1 on the agenda item. So we'll see you soon. Thank you. Right, we'll go back then. We'll now go to agenda item 5, community supported living, residential care, and residential with nursing care usual costs. So I welcome Alina Hackney, Pam Clipson, and Azan Zaburi, I've got it right, to take the lead on this one. And as I'd just like to say that the rule of thumb is that we want, and the drive and focus is to reduce people going into residential care homes, which is why the drive for personal budgets and all the other facilities are there. And the other thing is we need to just finalise what we say at the end to go back to the executive for their meeting. Councillor Tracy Carter.
Oh, although it's on my form, I'd feel more comfortable declaring non-pecuniary interest, one of the directors with Holbeach Hospital, who will receive payments from you. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So if we work our way through the slide deck, the first slide is about the rate construct and how we have arrived at the rates that are contained in the paper. We are in the middle of a 3-year residential framework, so we came in March 2022 with the full detail of the market assessment that was undertaken across all of our areas in partnership with our independent body Care Analytics. And this is the 23-24 residential rates and community supported living that we are discussing today. The rates continue to be based on the market assessment and the rate construct that was completed in 2021. All rates include the £10.42 national living wage, which will come into effect from the 1st of April. We have removed the original increase we applied to those rates to account for the national insurance. And even though I know the NI thresholds haven't changed, because we purposely increased our rates to reflect that, we are now reducing the rates to reflect that as well. We have included an 8.3% increase in our non-pay elements of the rates to reflect the forecast inflation for 23-24. That forecast is the CPI inflationary forecast that was published in January. That is a quarterly forecast that we track with Bank of England rates. Since setting these, the forecast has reduced again to about 7%. So bear in mind, these are only forecasts and we do continue to track them. In addition to that, Care Analytics have done a comprehensive exercise on inflation across the East Midlands, and their recommendation is 7 to 8%. So again, we're within the ballpark figure across our East Midlands colleagues. We have increased slightly more than others our older people residential rate, and that is to reflect the value we had within the maintenance aspects of that sector, to bring them more aligned to our adult specialties, especially given we know a lot of our smaller independent homes are within the older buildings across Lincolnshire. We are proposing for the first time a change to our community supported living rate. Up until now, we've had one rate, regardless of where that service has been delivered. That has caused significant challenges for our community supported living providers, and very similar challenges to the home care rate we brought through back in September, which is one rate does not reflect the rurality of Lincolnshire. So we are proposing a 2-tier interim rate and introducing a floating support at a higher rate to account for fuel, etc. within that service. It is an interim rate while we work with our Care Analytics colleagues to do a full market assessment, including that indicative cost for those providers. The reason we want to ensure we have stability across our community supported living is exactly the reason Councillor Whittington referred to earlier. If our community supported providers are not sustainable, then the alternative is that more expensive, longer term, not where we want them to be, residential care. So within the paper you will see there is the proposal to create that 2-tier community supported living rate. On the next slide, we do have a couple of risks. The first is the fair cost of care exercise that all local authorities went through and submitted to the Department of Health and Social Care in October 2022. We were one of those. We went through that exercise to secure not only the 22-23 funding, but also 23-4 and 24-5, which we have done. But what that did, that exercise incorporated the whole home costs, including those costs covered by higher fees, particularly paid for health and self-funders. For those that are close to the settlement and the news, we know there has now been a 2-year delay in the introduction of the charging reforms, Section 18.3 in particular, which could see self-funders come through the local authority. As a consequence of that, we have seen a reduction in the funding originally forecast into local authorities to support our fee rates. So we will continue to see residential providers reliant on those self-funder larger fees for longer. The risk that we are seeing within our provider feedback is our rates compared to that published fair cost of care position. We have recognised, as the Department of Health and Social Care has, that mechanical application of the median cost is drawn from that wider base, and it wasn't an intention to replace local authorities' fee setting. So we, at the moment, have continued on our usual process for setting the rates, but that is causing a bit of feedback from our market, understandably so. But from our point of view, we have written out to providers to show why there is a difference, i.e. the self-funders and home healthcare were included within those costs. And we will continue to feed back to our providers through to, I think it's the 27th of February, when our consultation process on the rates conclude. Two further risks identified include the particular strain we're seeing within some of our adult specialty areas, and their ability to continue to deliver care within the usual rates and contained within the paper. And we are also seeing, in a more longer term risk, a shift in our market for the 65 plus category. And this is where we're seeing the number of smaller homes reduce and being replaced by those larger group homes. So we have two recommendations within the paper to help us manage those two particular risks. And the first one of those on the next slide. We have received, along with other local authorities, a Market Sustainability and Improvement Fund. It is a new grant announced in the autumn statement, which is dedicated for adult social care. The objective is to improve the market sustainability and to build capacity across. However, we haven't yet received the conditions of that grant. And if you recall, the 22-23 grant did include certain exclusions, i.e. we weren't allowed to use it on working age adults. We don't know whether those exclusions will remain. So at the moment, our rates that are in the paper do not include our likely receipt of this fund. We are expecting it to be about 7.9 million. We know we need to continue to spend the 2.2 already committed to our home care rates to make sure our home care providers are sustainable and again alleviating our short-term and long-term residential care. The balance we are proposing would be focused on our residential care market, but how we do that will very much depend on the conditions attached to that grant when it is published. So the principle for today is we know we've got the risk within our residential market. At the moment, we would like to support them more, but how we do that will very much depend on the conditions of that grant.
Just on that, is the grant, so that new grant's coming in, could that be used to go into extra care housing? And actually sort of, you know, because, well, can it?
Well, if the conditions allow, it could, but I think we would need to work out actually where our priorities lie. We have, if you sort of cast your mind back to the January budget report, we have a 12 million capital programme going into extra care housing, and we are expanding our offer within that. We can only go as quickly as we can get the capital builds, etc., with our partner organisations into it. So my view would, yes, if the conditions allow, but we do already have a significant investment programme within that area. And from the risks that Alina and I are very aware of day in, day out, as is Justin Hackney, who's our AD for adult specialties, our residential support is needed here and now. So our proposal would be to put into that one first.
Okay.
Absolutely echo that point. You know, the risk in the marketplace at the moment around specialist services, both from a residential perspective, but a community-based one. So whilst we've had the opportunity to address some of the challenges with home care, what we came back in October, there needs to be some levelling up around community-supported living offer, but this is particularly targeted at the care home setting, and that's a really challenged marketplace at the moment.
So there is a bit of flexibility, but it's quite focused, and we've got a game plan.
We've definitely got a plan. It's, as Pam's point, it depends what the conditions of the grant say, and that we don't know.
We don't know. When's that due?
Imminently, but we don't know. Unfortunately, that's not within our gift to control. So, as Alina says, divisional leadership team has plan A, B, C and D, and it will all depend on when the government publishes the grant conditions. So we await. We are hoping they will be here before the end of March, but at the moment, all we can come and ask, unfortunately, is that we would like to target in residential care. If we have agreement with that today, Alina and I, Afsana and Justin, will go away and say, well, how far can we go with that, and how does that dovetail with our other areas that we're also working through, which is our reablement, our extra care, and all the other things that we brought to you in the budget paper in January.
Okay.
Okay. The next slide, the second way of managing those risks is the hardship fund. We have had this in operation in 22-23. And this was to support those expected volatile costs that we went through with the rates in 22-23, in particular things like our energy, insurance and fuel costs across the sector. The learning we have from the fund that's been in operation is that definitely a blanket one-size-fits-all uplift to our rates does not work across Lincolnshire. Our providers have been impacted very differently depending on which business and financial model they have in place, but also when their arrangements with their electric company, insurance company, when their fixed deals come to an end. So out of the £1 million we had aside within the fund for 22-23, we have spent 600,000 with our residential providers, and that's based on them providing the evidence of their impact. We only pay a contribution to their financial impact. We don't support the full cost. So the proposal for today is again that we would like to continue with the hardship fund into 23-24. We will carry forward the unspent allocation from 22-3 into 3-4, and the financial planning that we have done across the divisional leadership team is to increase that reserve up to 1.7 million to enable us to provide support into those services we know are going to struggle. However, again, given we don't know the conditions of the grant, what we've done is a financial plan that says we know we need to support residential, we know we need to support our specialist markets in particular. The values in front of you are based on plan A, B, C and D, and we've sort of pulled the money together to say the principles for today are, please can you consider continuing that hardship fund to that value. The outcome will be, we will be able to better support our residential sector, particularly adult specialties, and in our financial report that comes back to you at some point during the scrutiny year, we can then provide the update of exactly how we've managed those risks. So in terms of conclusions and next steps, we've got the rates set out in the tables in paragraphs 4.4a to E. Those rates apply the rate construct on the first slide, our inflation, our national living wage, etc. And that is where our starting point to ensure the rates go through are all detailed there. We would then suggest that we would like to recommend a continuation of the hardship fund to the 1.7 million to enable us address those key risks. We would then like to recommend a delegation to both Glenn and Councillor Boquet to enable us, as those grant conditions come out, to structure the hardship fund and the usage of that grant aligned to the principles of the report to better support those those sectors of the market most in need, and the recommendations on the report.
Okay, thank you. So that final one, where it's now gone, the improvement fund,
yeah.
Is that therefore the new grant as well, or is the new grant not really mentioned in any of the points to the executive?
So the Market Sustainability and Improvement Fund, that is ring-fenced to adult social care, so it can't be used for anything else.
Yeah.
So that will come in, and as the bit for today is the principles of residential care. The hardship fund, that is entirely up to recommendation from DLT is to use that on residential, but the reason we've asked that approved continuation is because that is within your gift to say, actually, it doesn't have to be used here.
But the new grants that are in effect that we've just spoken about, they're not really technically in here as such.
That's right.
Yes. Right, got you. Okay, well, I personally thought it was actually a very good detailed report, easily to read and easily to follow, and I think you covered things really very well. So thank you all for your contributions on that. One question is, I know there's been a bit about this larger homes and smaller homes, and in some sense, that's a tricky one because it's the evolution of the private sector in some cases. Do the larger homes contribute to Lincoln? Do they all contribute, or do they none of them contribute? What's their... I know Lincoln does support the smaller ones, but where's the larger ones sit?
Yeah, so the Lincoln membership is made up of a mix. So their membership across adult frailty is around 64%. And in terms of specialist services coverage, it's around about 42%. So it's not the whole market. What's really important to note from the exercise we've undertaken is whilst we've engaged with Lincoln as a care association, and they've responded very positively in terms of the way the approach that's been adopted, what we've also done is gone out to the whole marketplace to give them an opportunity to be able to respond on the rate construct. So that's the consultation that Pam was referring to. They've got until the end of this week to come back on their comments on that. So whilst Lincoln are a strategic partner and an association that we work closely with in terms of messages to the market, we also go to the whole market to give everyone the opportunity to feed in their comments.
Yeah, okay. And I suppose the final bit of that is when people don't come back, why not? And it could be that they're just too busy, but it's like everything, we would encourage them to come back and make their comments known.
So very typically, the bigger organisations with a larger infrastructure tend to respond more to the consultations than the smaller ones. However, to be fair, Lincoln do reach out to the small businesses. Certainly, a lot of the responses that we've had back today are a mix. More of the challenges are from the larger organisations. And back to your question, in terms of making sure we have the right mix in Lincolnshire, we work really closely with CQC and the district councils around the registration, so we don't hopefully end up in a situation where we have all large organisations and no smaller ones.
Yep. Okay, Andrew.
Thank you. Funnily enough, that's exactly what I was just going to talk about, this split between the smaller homes and the group homes and the hardship fund. I really think this hardship fund is really good. And you said, I think, that we spent 600,000 of the £1 million. What I would just like to know, and I don't know whether you can give me the details now, is how much of that 600,000 has gone to the group homes and how much has gone to the smaller homes? Because if we're losing some of the smaller homes, I just want to be sure that we're doing everything we can to support them if they get into a crisis. Because when people apply for grants, some people are good at filling in forms and some aren't. And if a big group home has someone who can fill the form in, I wouldn't want them to get the money rather than a smaller home, perhaps who don't have that ability or the time. Thank you.
I fully appreciate that. We have got a mix into the hardship fund, and we can provide exactly what that mix is outside of here. I think there are a couple of things. Whilst on average you see group homes do have that infrastructure, we also see some group homes that are struggling in terms of their abilities. Our systems and processes don't help. So as of this week, we have launched a wraparound service to all homes, regardless of whether they are groups or individuals. So each week we are focusing on 10 homes, to help them to work out where payments are within their processes, whether they need support within accessing that hardship fund. For that exact reason, is to make sure that if we've got homes that are struggling, whoever they may be, that actually they've got a direct link in, that we work with our commercial colleagues, our contracts officers from a financial point of view to help them through that. But we have seen a mix into that hardship fund.
That's really good. Sorry, that's really good to know. That we're providing that support, because it would be awful if a small home closed simply because they just didn't know where to turn.
If I can just add to that, but what also comes in terms of we have a whole sources of data and information that builds up a picture about any provider. So this is reliant on the providers coming to ourselves as a council to say, I need support. But actually, we have a whole number of processes in place where it feeds in information. So, for example, If there's shortfalls around quality, there's generally a link around finances in terms of cutting corners. That's just, you know, just one example. Their inspection can throw up concerns. We have officers that are going into these establishments, you know, pretty regular. We've got links in with agencies around staffing. So there's lots of information that comes in that builds up a picture. We've got a methodology that sits behind it, and that will hit triggers. So if we see that a provider, it goes into our high risk category, what we do then is take that once a month, we look at the providers who are in that area, they've hit those threshold, and then we'll start to talk to finance around other factors to see if there's any links, and we target support. So we're not reliant just on the sector telling us. There's a whole wealth of processes working in the background to indicate where a provider might be struggling. Okay, and we then target support out to that provider. So we reach out. So where the hardship funds really, come into play is where we have identified problems that are playing out in settings, and the hardship fund's been helped to help in some of those regards.
That's really reassuring. Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tracy Carter.
Thank you. On page 20, I'm just trying to understand what would fall into non-staffing, because to me it would be, you know, normal non-staffing items. But why is it different for older persons as opposed to LD, for example? Because to me, those costs would be the same. And then just finally, should on page 22 on the last bullet point, should it say cannot be met by the individual, cannot be met, the council must give the individual an explanation on the last bullet point? Because individual doesn't make sense. So just, I think, typo. But if it's been copied from guidance, we probably need to check that our guidance is correct too. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I'll have a look at the bullet point bit in a bit. In terms of the non-staffing, that's very much governed by what our providers told us through the market assessment that we did. And actually there's quite a variation. So depending on the type of home that we're in, we see different non-pay costs. We do see different scale of costs. So if you've got nursing compared to standard, if you've got learning disabilities compared to older people's, the non-pay varies between levels of PPE, whether they take individuals out of the home, so day trips, or non-staffing could be anything from activities to different types of, like I say, PPE, different levels of activities. There's all sorts of things that feed into that, but it is all driven from the providers telling us through the market assessment we did with Care Analytics what non-pay items they incur, and then we took the median across the sector. So you will tend to see differences between the types, i.e. older people's and adult specialties, as well as within those. So our older people's is split into standard nursing and HD. Our learning disabilities are split into bandings based on, again, need and the size of the home. So they do all vary to either in degrees or content.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mike Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm now back on. On page 15, you talk about the assessment that's carried out. Could you give us a bit of brief notes on the assessment? Is it, because you did mention that officers sometimes go to residential homes and inspect them. That would be, you know, a useful bit of added information.
If I pick up the assessment and then I'll pass to Alina, because it's her colleagues that pick up the actual home visits. To get to where we are now, back in 2021, we did an external procurement to look for an independent partner. Care Analytics were successful in that, and we established with them a full sort of dossier of what we would like them to look at in the market assessment. So we looked at which homes have we got where, which providers have we got where, because if we didn't just do it for residential, we also did it for home care, we did it across all of our markets. We reviewed occupancy levels, financial information, referral sources, business types. So, you know, do we have bigger homes, smaller homes, charities, private limited, what sorts do we have? So we actually did a very wide-ranging assessment of the market itself. We did publish those very openly back in January 2022, which we can send round. They were appended to the March 22 scrutiny paper. And what that has enabled us to do is get a really thorough understanding of just exactly our market shape, the types of businesses, and where we are best to target things like the hardship fund. In 22-23, we are the only local authority that ran a hardship fund. Other local authorities are now working with us to create such a thing where their finances, etc., allow. So we've used that market intelligence to do just that. And then I'll pass to Alina to talk about those actual going in visits.
Yeah, I mean, I probably could do a whole session on kind of contract management. Maybe that's something for a future scrutiny. But in relation to care homes, so CQC, Care Quality Commission, they typically inspect a home every 3 to 4 years. Where we commission services, and currently we commission services from 276 in-county homes. We have more out of county. But where in-county, there is a contract management team that will visit every home once a year, looking at from a compliance point of view, everything was set out of the specification, are they delivering and meeting those outcomes? But their other hat is very much there to support those providers they work with. So they do a lot of targeted work with providers where they may fall down in specific areas of concern. Or, for example, if a provider has had an inspection that has not gone too well, then it tends to be that contract officer who will work with the provider in terms of trying to get up to the standard that the CQC are looking for. So this is about us ensuring that what we are commissioning, we are getting, but they have got a dual hat as well, because as I say, we don't have an in-house service. Our commissioning activities, the whole is the market. So they're our partners too. Our relationship with them really matter. So we look at compliance, but we also are supportive in making sure we can try and up standards in the sector.
Thank you for that. As an add-on to that, please, obviously we're inspecting and speaking to the staff in the homes or different types of facilities. Do we ever speak to relatives of those in? Because they will have a different perspective as to how they're operated. Thank you.
Kind of the role that we do, I can see completely why it might look like an inspection, but inspection is CQC. So for us, these are relationship management in terms of the commercial arrangements. With regards to those, yes, we'll talk to residents and we'll talk to relatives. And we also engage relatives through our annual review. When a service user has its annual review, so what Afsane was talking about earlier, relatives also have an opportunity through there. But in terms of when we go out and visit homes to take a review of the services, where the opportunities allows that, we do talk to relatives as well. And sometimes we do targeted visits. So where there are non-compliance issues, where there are concerns around qualities, that's particularly when we do engage with third parties around the support for their relatives.
Just on that CQC, by the way, that's where Glenn is actually currently, is down in Essex, County Council evaluating their mechanism for getting CQC ready, which is good because he'll perhaps see some things that he likes and perhaps other things he doesn't like, but that's where he is. So on the CQC, just as you've been mentioning about that, is the merit for having a bonus scheme, an incentive scheme that in effect, because we always have this where we want everybody aspiring into the top level CQC, and in theory it shouldn't be based on whether it's a big organisation or a small organisation, but actually here we are sort of paying a fee Is there a mechanism, or have we ever looked at sort of
Yes.
actually how we can sort
And
of incentivise?
We had a quality assurance framework 10 years ago. It was at the point when it didn't work, that scheme, at all. It was looked at again 4 years ago. So that's basically a star-rated system. So payment would be attributed to where a home was deemed as a 3-star. It brought in lots of challenges. It was really damaging in the marketplace. It also could perceive to, you know, where we target our support is where it's needed most. And so the hardship fund, that's where it's targeted. Actually, what you're doing is channeling additional support and monies and resources for where it's not needed through that type of scheme. So it didn't work very well when it was introduced 10 years ago. Notwithstanding that, we did look at it again 4 years ago to see if we could build on that. Where it has been introduced into authorities, it also has been removed out. What we aspire to is for everybody to be at that standard, and that's why we have a compliance hat on, but we also have a hat on in terms of supporting and working with the sector to improve standards. Now, historically, up to 2 years ago, actually Lincolnshire was faring really well. We had something like 86% of providers were rated as good. Unfortunately, the last 2 years in COVID, we have seen those numbers drop slightly. But as I say, care homes, the sector as a whole is in recovery. You know, they've been hit really hard through COVID. And so we are starting to see green shoots in this area. But for us, we're aspiring to everybody being a good.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So I've got Councillor Mark Whittington and Councillor Trevor Young.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just pick on one point. Because you said that our relationship with Lincoln, and so we have 276 care homes in Lincolnshire, but where we have placements, but we also have some out of county. Because I always thought, and I may be completely wrong in this, that we only deal primarily with care homes that are members of Lincoln, because in some ways we don't know.
No, we can't do that. It's a business choice whether or not they join the care association. We play a role in that, encouraging them, you know, to be part of a bigger system and working with colleagues, you know, learning from each other. That's a really good thing to do. I think this is one thing we've identified. Actually, we've had the conversation this week at our own DLT. We do need to look at this. That membership has dropped off. We need to understand why that is. So there will be a review around that. But certainly, you know, the Lincoln do a lot of work with the sector, and we have an arrangement with Lincoln where we target them to support providers, whether they're Lincoln members or not. Okay, so they have a role. They have a really important role in the marketplace. But Lincoln, you know, they tend to have always historically been the voice of the market in terms of the rate negotiations, but we've always chose to go out to the whole market. But we work with Lincoln really closely, and they in turn work with the sector, whether they're members or not. There are additional benefits with being members.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks for clarifying that. I do a couple more things. Obviously, the presentation, I think, highlighted sort of quite a lot of the financial risk potentially that's still there. You know, and obviously being able to build some costs in, which we know about. I mean, we know about the increase in the national living wage, and we know about the national insurance. But obviously, around inflation, that's still obviously an estimated figure. And you also mentioned the financial risk potentially around the new emerging larger group homes, obviously building larger homes, but then in their unit costs, obviously they're recovering their cost of capital through those unit costs. So I see a potential risk there. I mean, on the other side, you would hope with the larger homes, that they, with economies of scale, they may have an impact on their unit costs as well in the other direction. But I do have concerns about that if that seems to be the way the market's going, because you see now some big care homes going up, and they're huge, they're massive, with several hundred residents, and I'm not entirely sure what the benefits are to residents in a large home and compared to a smaller one, because I'm guessing that a smaller home is probably more personalised care. Maybe you get to know your carers better, and obviously the risk in a larger care home is our link is gone. So I do have a few concerns around that sort of trend in the market, because obviously you sort of always a little bit suspicious because most of the problems, I know we've not had many in Lincolnshire, but most of the national problems that have been identified with care homes tending to be around the larger group homes as opposed to individual residential. So I do have concerns around that. But in terms overall of the financial risk we've got, the reality is we've got two funds to support that, which is the Hardship Fund and the Market Stabilisation Fund. So, and you're given the numbers, and of course this, but I'm just wondering what percentage of the overall budget is that? Because obviously, we've got 1.7 million in the Hardship Fund, which is a large number. But if your budget is 10 million, say, and your reserve is 1.7, that's quite a big reserve. But if your budget is 100 million, 1.7 million isn't such a. I'm just wondering if you could just sort of quantify the level of reserves we've got in percentage terms of the overall budget, because I think that would give me more confidence, because obviously we've identified all the risks there. We've identified some big numbers in reserves, but what percentage of the overall budget is that? Because I think that would give me I'd be a lot happier if I could understand that. Thank you.
I'll answer the first bit in terms of the large homes. So in some parts of the county regarding, and I'm talking about adult frailty now, we have an oversupply of beds. And so what we're doing at the moment is engaging with CQC to say it's not helpful nor is it sustainable for you to register large homes in those areas, because all that does is create competition to the point where it presents huge challenges for those smaller providers. So, and CQC have a role where they have to take in regard some of those aspects. We have a level playing field in the sense of, we have some providers, it's a provider's choice, whether in terms of business choice in terms of what they charge with rates. And we have some of the larger organisations who very much, as you've pointed out in terms of economies of scale, do work with the local authority around its rates. The same with the smaller homes. But likewise, we have some of the larger organisations and smaller homes who charge over and above those expected costs. For us at the moment, I think we brought previously, there's kind of an aspiration to really manage that marketplace in terms of where we want to commission services. So previously we've talked around things around block purchasing beds in certain locations. But we are very, very mindful at the moment that we have seen a shift where some of these smaller homes have closed and some of these larger organisations. We're talking of small numbers at the moment, but what we want to do is to prevent not finding ourselves in 3-4 years where we are effectively in a space where we can only commission from larger organisations who might have a higher price tag. That's not currently the situation in the county in terms of adult frailty at the moment, but we are starting to see that shift. So working with CQC, working with the sector and looking to introduce things like block contracts, hopefully will go some way or prevents us getting into that space where I think that we would find it most challenged. But we've also got some big providers in Lincolnshire that are also Lincolnshire based as well. So our relationship with them is really important. It's not just the big national organisations that you see across the country. And Lincolnshire's quite fortunate because actually we've got quite half a dozen of those where they are predominantly based in Lincolnshire. It's just the larger settings. Irrespective of the size of the home, the way that we support that home and the way that we monitor that home is exactly the same.
Well, I think you put that very well, actually, but I mean, it's like we say, isn't it? You look at some of the smaller homes, it's not about the size, it's about actually their build quality and their efficiencies within. I mean, and at the same time, you can nip to an big old stately home that's full of people and its windows will all be listed and every other part of the building will be listed, and then you've got the modern sprawling bungalow that's completely efficient, and it must be a headache on that. But I think, that's using the block contract concept to stabilise and flourish the market is really, that's a great idea. So I think that's something that should be promoted and is a tool that we have, because we don't have a lot of tools in our armoury in the private sector in some sense.
And going back to previous points, what we're trying to do is move away from bed-based. There will always be a place for bed-based, but maybe using that in a different way. So a really good example to that, and I think we're coming to scrutiny in a future day, but actually rehablement, we do that in people's home, but actually at the back end of last year, we've started to introduce that concept into care homes. It's very, very different to being in a home receiving care as part of a care home resident. But in actual fact, we've had some really positive results from that, where people have gone into care settings and been able to go back home. So, definitely in terms of, we're looking to reduce the number of people that we place into care homes, but we might use care homes in a different way, as well as introducing things like block contracts.
Yeah, I think from the financial position, this is a very challenging market, and we used to be able to set 3-year rates. We're not in that environment anymore. The volatility of the cost in the economy is not putting ourselves in that space to do that. From the work that we've done, the market assessments, we know we have a sustainable rate in home care, and that came through in September. We do believe a multi-tier rate in CSL will provide the more sustainable rate there, and that's what residential, therefore, is our target area. For our unit cost, the hardship fund, with or without the market improvement fund, the two together is about 5% of our budget. But saying that, we are investing a significant amount in reablement. All of our capital is going into extra care. So absolutely that bit around, but actually is residential the best place for everybody to be, is very much individual dependent. So a very complex picture for Lincolnshire because of the differing business structures. Absolutely, it keeps me awake at night. If we get a big shift towards those larger group homes, our rate will have to accommodate that. But finances within the local authority, that is where we would really, really struggle. So we really need a focus on that transformational programme to make sure people are going into that right service, whether that's reablement, extra care, or wherever that might be. The preventative conversation we had earlier, make sure we've got the investment in the right areas. If we don't, or it takes us too long to get there, then you will see our cost base go sky high in the next 12, 24 months if we cannot broaden that offer available to service users, and then we will start to see our financial budgets come under the pressure. At the moment we are within budget, we are forecasting within budget in 23-24, but if you remember the way we brought the budget proposal in January, is we have got a significant amount of work behind that we need to do to deliver that sustainability in the market. So on the pure mathematical calculation is 5%, but actually we've got a lot of investment going into capital and revenue in those other services. We know it's around the right ballpark because we have run the hardship fund for the year. We do know the cost base on average across all of those different business types. But the reason we are not applying that blanket percentage into our rates is for exactly the points Alina and I have raised throughout this, that one size doesn't fit all, and we need to use the funding that we do have to target to those businesses, whether they're residential, home care or whatever, that actually need the support to get them to a sustainable footing.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I've got Councillor Trevor Young and then Councillor Nikki Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I suppose the offer in terms of alternatives to residential nursing care is obviously through community supported living. Are we convinced in terms of the offers sufficient enough in terms of being attractive to providers to provide that alternative provision? I know in my part of the county, in the north, the feedback is that offer is very limited. It might be available in terms of older adults. I know in terms of other client groups, it feels like it's very limited. And the question, I suppose, is that, you know, what we're doing in terms of trying to develop that alternative option. I was pleased in terms of your thoughts in terms of working with the existing residential care providers in terms of maybe offering reablement and other type services out, because I think that's the future. But is there any appetite from the residential providers to provide a different type of service from that building-based residential type building to maybe more hub and spoke out in the community, etc., etc.? Because it feels, in particular in my part of the county, that, you know, there's a need in terms of that.
The offer looks very different if you're in adult frailty ward to specialist services. So the only thing that looks similar is community supported living feels a bit like a home care service for adult frailty. So there are some similarities, but in terms of the offers in each of those client groups do look very, very different. And it's much wider than you referred to community supported living. There are other schemes, different schemes, and it is dependent where in the county. But a lot of these things are county-wide as well. So it's much broader than community supported living. I mean, just to put it into context, we have over 1,000 contracts and only 276 of those were in the care home setting. So you know, just giving a feel in terms of what the offer is, that scale ranges from residential type services to community-based type services, and within that portfolio there's a number of different things, including daycare. Then we have we've got 31 strategic type county-wide services, so the offer is quite extensive. In terms of the latter part of your question, if I just use that as an example, we went to care homes specifically because of the challenges in across the partners, health and social care partners, around discharges, for example, out of hospitals. We went to the care sector with a very different concept and model just before Christmas. So we said, okay, whilst it's the building, the care home building, we want to set that up, and it's known as active recovery, in terms of supporting that individual, where we've got different types of services coming into the home. So for example, therapy type services, and that's been in operation for 8 weeks now, and early indications we're getting more than a quarter are going home from that care home back to their home to be able to know service. And that the care sector, the care homes, had to respond to that very, very quickly. Completely different staffing structure in terms of the way they operate in the home. Now that was done very quickly, and I'm pleased to say we had 6 care homes across the county who are involved in that scheme. That's something we want to build on, and I'm pleased to say that actually Health and social care system have agreed to extend that scheme for a further year. So we'll explore that offer even further. So I think in answer to your question, yes, they have got a role to play, and a really important role. And, you know, certainly they play a really important role with some of our community-based services. So, for example, some of the care home staff might support home care services out into the community. And we've got examples of that where care homes, whilst maintaining a care home, they also run care home services as well.
Just shows when initiatives need to be done quickly, how we can adapt and actually deliver good services quickly too. But we'd like to come in.
Thank you. Just to add to what Elena said, one of the factors that can and is extremely important if we want to expand of the offer of the community first, your bed is the best and home first, is the partnership working with health. Give you an example. Somebody fit to be discharged from hospital but needs some IV in medication through IV, and unfortunately if it's not possible in the community, that person can't even go to residential home, needs to go to a nursing home. And the studies show when you're moving a person to a residential home, it will be deteriorating in the health. It goes down the hill very quickly, sadly. So getting that person back to the community would be extremely difficult. But imagine if we had a community support, health, nursing team to do the IV in the community. The person will go home, stay in the home with the family, loved ones in the neighborhood, and will recover even quicker. So the market is happy to support, and Elena's team has got doing everything in their power to support and contribute towards the development of the market. But we also need our partners, especially community trust. And the good news is that they are now looking at developing a model around the community hospitals. And hopefully in the future, maybe I'll be able to come and share more with you. Yeah.
And in addition to that, a programme that's underway at the moment with all partners is looking at what we call intermediate care, in terms of how so at the moment, all partners will commission or support individuals to be discharged from hospital or support them into their own home. What we're looking at the moment is designing a single system in terms of how that can be more effective and more timely. So at the moment, we're due to report on this in May, is looking at designing an intermediate care layer, so that helps things like flow from hospital much quickly. Also, people in the community accessing services. We can only do that based on what Afsane's just said in terms of partners coming together about how we can mobilise support rather than the council do their bit, LCHS do their bit, etc., etc. We're trying to design it so it's a single system.
Convalescent home to those of yesterday's world type thing. But, okay, Nikki.
Yeah, thank you for the report and all the detail around it. I must admit it, I had to read it two or three times actually to try and get it into my head and the understanding. And your explanations this morning have been really, really helpful and answered actually quite a lot of my questions and put me at ease a little bit. But the other thing that I want to ask you, given the complexities and the scale and all the challenges and obviously the changes that are now going to be taking place within this particular sector, I want to ask you about the hardship fund. How long do you anticipate the hardship fund being there? Because at some point in time, with the challenges in the sector and all the changes that are taking place and all the complexities that you're talking about, will it need to remain? Is it something that we will need to continue with? Because eventually, as we've seen in all sorts of areas within our support, we sometimes have to withdraw, and that makes it very difficult. So I want to ask you about the reality of the hardship fund, its lifespan, and really where you anticipate that being and for how long. Thank you.
think that rather depends on the level of funding that comes into local authorities. My team bought me a crystal ball about 2 weeks ago, and I've asked for it to be returned because I think it's faulty. For us, I think we need to review this on an annual basis now when we do the rates. And the conclusions we'll come to is, we know one size doesn't fit all into the rates. We know, as Alina articulated earlier, different parts of the market are still in recovery from what has been a very challenging couple of years and straight into, cost of living crisis. So our roles in commercial and finance is to advise adult care actually where we think the best use of the money and how that is operated across our contracts. For me, I think the hardship fund will definitely be there for this year and potentially next. But what we would have to do is continue to monitor the use of that throughout this year. We sat here last year and said we think roughly about £1 million for residential care would be required. We haven't spent that full £1 million. And that isn't because, we haven't allowed that through. It's actually, that's based on the evidence claims of the homes. So again, we'll monitor it this year. We'll work through with our commercial colleagues and our frontline practitioners to say actually how is that market looking. We've got, these are plans, these are forecasts. If things don't come to fruition as we expect them to, and all of the programmes that we've got in place maybe don't come off quickly, we might need more, we might need less. It really is going to be quite dynamic. So for us, we think this year, potentially next. We don't want to leave a level of uncertainty with the providers because temporary funding doesn't help. But that is unfortunately an area we're in for the next, I would say, 2 years, to be honest. That's where we are. But the lower the reliance and the more certainty we can give to the market, the better our market, the quicker our market will recover.
There's so many variables that could happen. Workforce, we've not even touched on workforce. Workforce is a huge challenge for the sector. And although we've obviously seen an increase in the national living wage, we're absolutely, all those things will help. They're things that sometimes are out of their control. So we might get a new Aldi's spring up in an area that could have an impact in a care home in terms of the staffing levels. That means they have to go to a staffing agency. A staffing agency's costs are far higher. So there are always variables that, make this really challenging. As Pam said, it comes down to funding. We're waiting for what the conditions say, because if that really restricts us, that makes it really difficult. And then the hardship fund may come into use more because providers are asking us in that. So there's so many unknowns at the moment. It's kind of, we've seen some things improve as well. So that's improved things. So things like fuels steadied over the last couple of months. So it's really uncertain, but if we continue to work really closely with the sector, as we have done today, and all the things that we have in place, triggers to identify early indicators, hopefully we can manage that as best we can with our plan A, B, C and D, and there are many plans.
Well, there's one thing is that there are issues within the sector like workforce, but in 20 years' time, it'll perhaps be called Hitachi or Toyota, and they'll come at your demand. But there will be an influx of automation go on, because where there's shortfalls, the private sector will plug it somehow. Right, I've got Marianne Overton, and then we'll summarise.
Thanks very much. It's been really helpful, and I have to say, hearing our officer speak here, it gives me significant confidence. I really appreciate your thorough grasp of all the detail, which is really helpful, I think, for us. So thanks for that. I just wanted to pick up the issue you started with about whether you were going to target residential care rather than community care. I think I understood. And I would like confidence that the community care is still going to get enough. Clearly, that's also significant pressure in terms of being able to get staffing to do the job. It's very difficult. So perhaps you could just help us on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a community care perspective, we introduced a 4-tier rate for home care last year. We actually backdated it to April 2022 using the grant funding. And we saw a significant increase, didn't we, from our 3-tier rate into that 4-tier. For me, we've made a significant investment in the community services. We've done the 4-tier rate, we've had floating support going into there, all sorts of different initiatives, reablement, etc. So the reason we're saying we would like to focus this one on residential is because actually a lot of the funding we got in 22-23 was and continues to be targeted at the community. We have, through the budgets for this year, we have put a significant investment into our community supported living, which is the recommendation here, and that will then become further investment into that. That's just short of £1 million going into learning disabilities community supported living. So I think we've got a significant amount going in there. I'm fairly confident, and the feedback that we've had is that those rates have been increased higher than we have done before. They are still going to see some of the fuel. So yes, Alina's right, the fuel has started to stabilise, but what we've seen is it was here, it went up to here, it's going to stabilise here. And you're going to see that a lot across energy, food prices, from here, shoot up, they're not going to return. So I think the next 2 years is critical on, well, where actually is that going to settle? And that's what we're going to use our hardship fund for. We know the social care reforms may come back in 2025. We'll see it accelerated again. 2 years, I think, for me, hardship fund, but we will support across adult social care for the hardship fund, focus on residential. But if somebody comes in and says, we're unsustainable as a community service, then the process we have in place will review that. Review that request.
Just for assurance, the work around the community supported living, as Pam says, the additional monies that has been found, that's not part of this. That's where we try and introduce. There are more of those providers. There's 34 on our framework, but they're going to get just as much as attention as what we're doing on care homes. It's just the way how this report's been tabled in terms of how the funding will be targeted around care homes. But community supported living are really, really valuable, and we absolutely recognise that we need to do quite a lot of work with that sector, and by introducing this interim rate has been received really well.
That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Can I just, I would just like to add as well, because when we got the budgets coming through for adult care scrutiny, the public protection scrutiny also received those services that entered, and there are some of those providers that are struggling with the cost of living. So our hardship fund will encompass those services, like domestic abuse, the Eden links, that are struggling with the same energy. They're all under contract with LCC. Hardship fund will support those as well. So I just wanted to provide that assurance that the council overall is looking at that process, not just into residential. It is just that the focus of this report is residential and CSL. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got one question just before I summarise up. Looking at the statistics and the figures of those attending, unfortunately for the ladies, they seem to occupy the homes a bit more than the males in the figures. On the over 65s, you're at 1,600 and the males are at 700. Is there, if we're going to look at target focusing, is there potentially a mechanism out there rather than just relying on everybody going into a residential home? I mean, are there some of those ladies involved because in effect there's not really necessarily an alternative, or they're lonely and actually we haven't really got them built back into the communities from, say, the loss of a husband or a partner? Have we sort of looked into really the dynamics a bit more, whether we can play a part of connectivity and look at sort of other things? Because I know, I look at, we all look at our families and you think, well, actually, they've gone into a home because actually they're lonely. And in some sense, it's sort of connecting. I mean, at sort of 1,600, even if you reduce that down by 100, the savings is phenomenal in this area. So.
Thank you, Chairman. Women live longer.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons that we have more female residents, service user, is because of the fact that we live longer. And we can I have been working in adult social care all my adult lives, and I'm 60 years old, so it's equals 40 years. And I have never known any kind of rules or criteria for treating female differently to male because of, So we can't have different kind of treatment for people. The treatments are very much around environmental factors, health conditions, and but what I would like to do now, take into consideration, it's been raised at the scrutiny committee. I would like to have a look around and see if there are any research nationally or internationally, and there are any findings that I can use and reflect in the practice if it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really whether there's any chance that we can get people to come together and actually, in effect, you know, two people could actually become good friends and actually support each other living in one of their homes, for argument's sake. I don't know, but it's that sort of bring it back into a community rather than just going residential. I mean, I'm sure if I was a guy, I would quite like to hang out with a new mate watching sports and actually be in one of our homes and have a companion and try and stay away from a residential home. But, you know, it's just, with the numbers there, it's always needs to be, in my view, a bit of a focus in how we sort of, can we do things other than just that's the option.
I don't believe that is just the option. As I said,
I
there's
know
over 1,000 contracts, and when an assessment is undertaken, Asana's description of home first is always the starting point about how they can live at home safely, and there's lots of different schemes that we commission to be able to people to remain in their own homes, and there are befriending services, there's daycare, there's quite a range of different services. And you know, once upon a time when I started back in the 90s, care in the community residential homes was very much a convalescent home. In actual fact, that's not the case now. When we go around residential and nursing homes, it tends to be the latter part of the life, and that's because actually people are accessing other types of service to be able to live at home, and certainly we do commission those range of services. It's just residential services is one of the big spend areas within adult care, so it obviously has this particular focus and amount of work that goes in to make sure that we are paying a fair rate. But the vast amount of services that we commission now, residential is only one part of our service map. Maybe if you've seen the service map might be helpful.
It's just the one area that we don't want them in, but it's the one area that it is the last port of call.
Because it's a big spend area, that's why.
Yeah. Okay, so in effect, we have the recommendations, which I think we can, let's just go through. Are we all happy with the recommendations put forward? And we all accept the recommendations, and I think, you know, to be fair, it is a good, the prices I think have really been very well set actually, and especially in line nearly with inflation. So on that score, good. The other bits which we've sort of spoken about, target focus for alternatives with the new grants. And I've got, are you ready, Simon, by the way? Just making notes. Using block contracts to keep the industry flourishing and in effect, I suppose, versatile in each area. And then the needs to accelerate, I put intermediate care. What was the word that you used for what we've just done in the last 2 months? Active care. So what we're calling active or intermediate or both? Right. Okay, because I think that's important. That certainly has been a game changer, and that needs to be accelerated and given sort of some oomph as well. And I suppose the other one was whether the alternative settings, potentially, on the intermediate, the community care, I think we perhaps need to define what that means so that people understand it, because we've got home care, we've got residential nursing, now we're going to start talking about community care more and more. We perhaps need to sort of promote it, but also define it. And it's, would you say? I mean, it's all right for you guys working often in the environment all the time, but start flashing words about in the public domain can come a bit misleading. And I think perhaps a clearer explanation as well as promoting it would be my recommendation. The other thing would be the alternative settings are sort of got in there. We're going to set flats up with 4 people in and keep them in there and look after them. I mean, was that the concept, or was it or was it really looking at all the other contracts that we provide? I didn't quite pick up on the full, but I.
Because that would include your ambition for your extra care housing, your reablement, your intermediate care, all fits within that. So I think it's promoting and being clear on what that offer is and the time for that.
So clarity on that. Yeah, that's fine. And that's it. Anybody else got anything else? We're all happy with that? Okay, all support that. I need a proposer and a seconder. Andrew, followed by Mike, seconding. All in favour? Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've thrashed that through, that's for sure, and given it a very good airing. So, thank you very much, and very good job. Okay, we'll go on to item 6, subsistence misuse grant monies. For this, welcome Lucy Gavins and Simon Gladwin to start off. I think, as I said to Lucy, if she can sort of just simplify the message, what has been sort of looks like a sort of a government initiative, and therefore sort of makes it more complicated, and I suppose in some sense they set the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Will do, Councillor Marfleet. Okay, so I will try and summarise and kind of talk through what I accept is quite a complicated set of additional grant funding that's coming our way for substance misuse, and I'll just start very briefly back at the beginning. So in February last year, the national government announced significant additional funding for substance misuse, specifically for treatment in England. The funding started last summer and is expected to last until at least 24-25, when the next spending review is due. But when that initial announcement was made, there was an indication that the funding would last for 10 years. So this is a long-term ambition, but the funding coming to us we've only got some clarity around the level of funding through to 24-25. To enable us to spend the first year's funding, so for 22-23, the current financial year, in July last year, the executive approved an exception to our contract regulations to allow us to deliver the 22-23 spending through the current contract with We Are With You. That was £1.4 million worth of funding for this current financial year. And a lot of the activity that we talk about in this paper has already started within this financial year, and a good chunk of it is continuation of that work that's already underway. And we very recently secured some greater clarity then around what level of funding we're getting for 23-24, so to start from the 1st of April this year. There are a number of different government departments involved in allocating out the grants. The total value across 4 separate funding streams is 2.6 million for 23-24. 3 of the 4 grants have been approved by national government already. One of them actually only landed with us last week for us to start the activity on the 1st of April. So there has been a lot of there's been a lot of work that we've done with government departments in preparation for that. But just to give you an indication of the fact that this is kind of an ongoing area of work. But we really do believe that the funding will have a significant impact on our treatment offer across Lincolnshire. So across the 4 funding streams, the money is being offered to help us to improve the quality and the reach of our substance misuse treatment and recovery services. There are some specific challenges that we face across Lincolnshire that the funding is helping us to address. So that includes things like very high caseloads for our drug and alcohol workers. Up until when we received this funding, a lot of our kind of generic drug workers were carrying caseloads of around about 70 clients. That's really very high. With the first year's funding, we've been able to get that down already to around 55. So what that means is that the quality of treatment will improve. Other challenges include our ability to do assertive outreach. So some Lincolnshire residents will really struggle to come to us in a service, and what we would like to be able to do, and what we are doing with the additional grant funding, is more outreach into vulnerable communities. So people who are rough sleeping or are at risk of rough sleeping, for example. Vulnerable women who we know find it particularly difficult to access the service for various reasons, could be childcare responsibilities and other factors that make it harder for them to come to the service. We also know that there have been increasing numbers of drinkers, people drinking at high levels through the pandemic and since the pandemic. And so the funding is supporting us to do more work with people who are drinking at a harmful level. And then one of the other key areas is around boosting work with colleagues across the Integrated Care Board, with LPFT, around people who are living with dual diagnosis, so people who've got kind of co-occurring alcohol or drug problems and serious mental illness. So we've got some targeted work around dual diagnosis as well. So that's some of the challenges that we're looking to address with the additional funding. In terms of the specific benefits the funding will bring, so smaller caseloads is one of them. There's much more specialist support available within the service through this funding. So we've got female-specific workers, we've put in some additional support for children and young people, we've increased the capacity to support people who are in contact with the criminal justice system, including kind of what we call liaison and diversion before someone's gone to prison, and also supporting people who are on probation, for example. And there's lots of assertive outreach programs into, as I've mentioned, kind of rough sleeping populations, people who are at risk of losing, who've got unstable housing, and for people who are in hospital. It's worth noting, and I think kind of touched on this before, that the grant funding does require us to focus on treatment. But we are simultaneously working through the Lincolnshire Drug and Alcohol Partnership to increase our all-age prevention activity. Including work with providers. We Are With You, who provide our specialist service, and One You Lincolnshire, who provide the lower level alcohol support that was talked about earlier on this morning. And that prevention focus and expanding our prevention work is a really important part of what we will do alongside expanding the treatment offer, to make sure that we support people not to need the service in the longer term. We are, as I mentioned, already a year into the funding, albeit we received a smaller allocation in 23-24. The provider has responded well to that additional funding, so we've been monitoring the impact closely through our current contract managing routes, but also because the Department for Health and Social Care and the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities have given us some clear criteria they want us to measure against as well. So, for example, our mental health liaison posts have seen a 10-fold increase in the number of referrals for adults who are vulnerable because of that co-occurring drug or alcohol problem and mental ill health. And as I mentioned before, we've seen a shift in caseloads, so that our workers are now able to support a slightly smaller number of people more intensively. So of the 2.6 million additional income to enhance substance misuse services, it's proposed that 2.4 million of that be spent through our existing contracted services with We Are With You and Framework for Housing Related Support. And then a small amount, a further 159,000, is coming to support commissioning work, grant monitoring and management. And in order to enable us to spend the 2.4 million through the existing contracted services, we do need to proceed through corporate governance and decision-making to secure an exception to vary the current contracts to enable us to spend this money from the 1st of April 2023. From 24-25, so from next financial year, any future national grant funding will be wrapped up in the recommissioning of the service that's ongoing.
Okay. So I'm just going to start off with the game plan of this. This is the From Harm to Hope, a 10-year drugs plan to cut crime and save lives. A 10-year plan to cut crime and save lives by reducing the supply and demand for drugs and delivering a high-quality treatment and recovery system. That is the government's strapline. Might help if they mention the word preventative rather than just throwing cash at treatment, but that will come on to... Did you want to come in, Andrew?
Yeah, it's just a question on page 54, please. It did take a bit of getting your head around all of this, but the rough sleeper treatment grant, it's just the figures in the columns that I just can't quite get my head around it. The data analyst is £47,000, but 2 outreach team leaders are only £50,000, and the outreach misuse workers are only £42,000 each. So more money is going to a data analyst than to people who are doing the frontline work. And I just want clarification around that. It just looks a bit odd.
You're quite right, it does, and it is. The outreach team leader is one post. That should be 1.0, sorry, not 2.0. And the peer recovery work planner at the bottom, which looks like it costs £70,000, is actually for 2. So those 2 have got mixed up in the typos. Apologies for that.
Thank you. The other concern, obviously, was that we're paying a data analyst more than a frontline worker. Thank you.
The data analyst is a post within LCC. It's at the same rate as the other data analysts that we employ within adult care. That includes on costs.
Okay. Right, first off, I'm going to just flip back to that aim, because I think the aim here is important. There's 3 areas: breaking drug supply chain, delivering a world-class treatment and recovery system, which I think the paper is actually dealing with that element. I don't think it doesn't mention about breaking the drug supply chain, and it goes achieve a generational shift in demand for drugs. I think that's a challenge and a half, but in everything I've sort of read on that and everything I've read in the paper, my view would be to start with the aim, because that's the government's strategy, which should be in the paper, because that is in effect the key focus. The next part is really the priorities, because the world of drugs, and I presume they talk about alcohol. I don't know whether they classify alcohol as a drug in this case or not, but it technically is a drug. And that's the thing with drugs, is that there's a whole range of different types of drugs. Some are prescriptive and some are illegal. And predominantly we're talking about illegal drugs here. But I think there is a priority, because some have devastating effects on people's lives and in communities, and some actually aren't so devastating. So there should be a priority where this council wants to focus on. And we should have a sort of an idea, i.e. if you've got a lot of crackheads in a certain part of town, then actually that's got to be your focus, because the damage that does is enormous. And all that happens is you take people out of that community, and the bad people are left in those communities and will go after the next generation or the next age group. And actually there's no mention of police or anything in this, and actually they are a fundamental part to actually spearheading breaking the drug supply chain. So I would sort of say priority and mapping. The next thing is, we're talking about 12-month contracts. What happens at the end of 12 months? Now, the reason, let's open this up and actually have a debate, because in 12 months' time, we look like we're going to have a revamp. So that means that all the people that have got a job are either going to lose their job in 12 months, or they will be given a new contract, or you're talking about secondments. And you've got a lot of employment going on here. And I know a lot of it comes straight from central government telling us how it is to be done, but if we don't map out our local needs and actually put that in, this strategy will never work. And it's somebody's ambition to make it work, but by God, it's certainly a challenge. You know, it's the way these cultures work and how you understand that and work within that. And that's the real thing that misses for me, is the whole preventative strategy. And ours at the minute is what I call in that middle bit, trying to deal with treatment and recovery. And I think that my message back would be, we need a preventative strategy. We need police also involved in and mapping these areas that they are in the communities. And you don't need to be a genius to watch TV to sort of see that the devastation, and believe you me, if you're at 15 years old and actually you're slightly misguided, these guys that push drugs will get you hooked on them and destroy your life, the parents' lives, and everybody else around it. And it's so dangerous, but it has to be focused. You know, smoking some grass is got a risk, but it's not as bad as getting involved in the likes of crack and heroin and all the other bits. And it just, I think there's more that can be done.
I'll come back on both points, and then if Simon wants to add anything, you can. So around the broader strategic work around drugs and alcohol prevention, alongside this funding, and you're absolutely right, this funding is focused on the treatment, kind of delivering a world-class treatment service. But we're not doing this work in isolation. Back in September, we established the Lincolnshire Drug and Alcohol Partnership, which sits under the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership. So substance misuse was identified as an SLP priority last year, but at the same time, we as the national government launched the strategy, they asked us to set up a local strategic partnership to run alongside this funding. So we have the Lincolnshire Drug and Alcohol Partnership. It has good representation from a range of important stakeholders across Lincolnshire. So the police, absolutely, the police vice chair. I chair that group on behalf of Derek as the Director of Public Health. The vice chair is a colleague from the police force. We have Councillor Bradwell sits on the partnership as well, and then we've got representation probably from around about 20 organisations that have a role to play in supporting people with the prevention and treatment and recovery of drugs and alcohol in its broadest sense. And we do also, at least we're starting to consider things like misuse of over-the-counter medications, so the whole range of substances which can kind of cause harm, which typically would be supported through a service like One Year Lincolnshire or We Are With You. Within that group, we've got, for example, we've got probation, we've got the prisons, we've got the district colleagues, we've got housing-related support, we've got homelessness colleagues, we've got the Department for Work and Pensions so that we can have conversations about supporting people into employment, colleagues from children's services, colleagues from adult care, and colleagues from across the NHS, including LPFT, to support conversations around dual diagnosis. So we've only been established for 5 months now. But we've done a comprehensive needs assessment, which builds on the joint strategic needs assessment, drug market profile work that the police have done to really help us understand what the key challenges are across the whole prevention and treatment system for Lincolnshire. And we've got a delivery plan now that we've just set in motion from last month, which includes delivering a world-class treatment system as one of the 6 priority areas, but we've also absolutely got a priority around prevention and developing and delivering an all-age prevention strategy. And then we've got some other aspects that kind of tackle some of the key challenges we've identified locally. So there is a much bigger conversation happening around that prevention and treatment approach across Lincolnshire, which this is just a part of. And that broader group is where we have much more of the conversations around things like breaking drug supply chains, working really closely with the police around things like county lines, but also where we have the conversations about how we tackle that third very ambitious target objective around changing culture. Because that is a longer term ambition and something that we need everybody and the people of Lincolnshire to kind of come on a journey with us on, because that's going to take time. But by working together collectively, hopefully we should start to make steps in the right direction. The second question was around... What's the second question around?
Just on that, before you go into second. So have we actually got anywhere, sort of like what you've just said, in effect, is really what I would call the preliminary to what we're talking about here, and it's as though we sort of missed that. Have you got like an executive summary, or the fact that we've got our strategy somewhere?
Yes, yeah, we've got that produced separately, and we can share that and add that to the paper.
Right, okay, because I think, it's, in effect, we're here to scrutinise, but it's just, I think there's a hell of a risk here, and it's not necessarily, it's making sure that we bring it back to what Lincolnshire needs and identify it from Lincolnshire. It does talk in here about the central government, 55,000 people or whatever it is, all on this, that and all the other, but actually there's no mention of Lincolnshire, and it's sort of one of those where we're here to sort of, in effect, recommend this to the executive, and I feel a bit blinded by not really quite sure where our focus necessarily is, and I don't know whether that's just me, but I just feel it needs to be put into the bigger picture.
It's a balance as well, because there's a significant amount of work that kind of underpins the summary that's provided in the report. So there's a balance of not appreciate you need the detail to be able to scrutinise, but we're trying to strike a balance in terms of how much information we present. We've got really detailed submissions. So for each of the lines in those tables, we've got separate submissions where we've pulled plans together. With, again, working in partnership with colleagues across Lincolnshire. And each of those, just one of these tables with 6 lines would be blown up to kind of 2 pages. And so if we put, so appreciate there's always more detail we could put in. We're just trying to strike a balance here.
Yeah. So.
The second question was around, could you just remind me, Councillor Marfley, you'd asked about the strategic piece, but then also something else around... the contract, yes. Yeah. So, and absolutely, we've been working as part of our recommissioning work to model, to do demand and financial modelling for the future, which is really complicated because we've got some level of security around the funding through to the end of the 24-25 financial year. We know that national government has an ambition to fund for 10 years, but a lot can change in the next couple of years, not to mention with the spending review as well. So, Simon, perhaps if I could just hand over to you just to give a really brief summary of how we managed that uncertainty within the demand and financial modelling for the future.
Yeah, essentially what we've done is we've put together a number of different models that not only look at the grant funding, but look at when the different grant funding may or may not continue to, but then also if the grant funding ceased, what we would have and what we would need to do moving forward to sustain a service. So it was a quite complicated model, but basically we've come up with a structure that is quite clear around where the grant funding is going to go, where we're going to prioritise. A lot of that is based on what the government are pointing us in the direction of, but also then, should the grant funding cease, we have got a plan in order to be able to sustain a model moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I support the 12-month contract because I think you need 2 things. One, government, you don't know what it's going to do and it might pull the funding. And the second thing is I think you need flexibility to adapt actually here, and the quicker we learn and adapt, I think some of those job roles will change to perhaps some preventative and some to I think it will come clearer over the next 12 months, so you perhaps need that. So Trevor? Sorry.
Chairman.
One of the things we've just done some of the market engagement for the new tender that's due to go out later this year, and it's been really encouraging that the big providers are all very much on board with scaling services up and down. So the government grants going up and down is not so much of a problem as what we thought it might be for services moving forward.
Okay. Right, I've got Trevor and then Karen. And then
well, Chairman, personally, I completely agree with your comments in terms of the aims, in terms of the strategy, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. I struggle with this in terms of understanding, in terms of actually what is the outcome which we're trying to achieve and how we're going to do it. And that's not a criticism of you 2 guys, but it's an observation in a way. My fear is in terms of the level of funding which we're trying to work with, we're only scraping the surface. My own particular area, my own division, yeah, I could quite easily swallow that amount up, and you still wouldn't be addressing the problem. You know, and that's, and when I read through the report, sadly, it had no mention in terms of the north of the area. So I think it's an ambitious plan in terms of what you've got. Is it realistic? I don't know whether it is. We've got, you know, in parts of my own particular ward, I've got drug dealers on every street, every single street. I've got kids as young as 10 riding scooters delivering drugs. You've got people in the street shooting cocaine in their thighs and with injecting, etc., etc. The problem is that in terms of understanding the pathway in a way, in terms of how people, because it feels to me it's going to be quite a discreet service. Maybe it needs to be a discreet service. But how do people refer in? And then there's also an element of actually an awful high percentage of people who's involved in around drugs and substance misuse. They don't want treatment. They're quite happy in terms of what they're doing. I just struggle to understand in terms of how we're going to reach some of those individuals. And then I have to be critical in terms of the police stance in the north of the county on substance misuse, drug issues. Honestly, for the last 4 or 5 years, trying to get engagement has been really difficult. There's been slight improvements in the last couple of months, but they have been non-engaging. And I think I struggle with the concept in terms of what this is going to address, who you're going to address it to, and what the impacts, what the outcome is going to be, how people are going to see a difference, because I don't see it within this report.
Over to Lucy and Simon. All of our districts, you can see the districts that we have there. We've got Boston, Lincoln, and we've got Grantham. Those areas have got real bad problems with rough sleeping, which are related to drugs and alcohol. We've got the probation services, so when police arrest these people for doing wrong, they go into prison. 4 months or 5 months later, they come out again onto our streets. Yeah. So we've been working with, we've got the Housing, Health and Care Delivery Group who've been working with our rough sleeping strategies around these districts. This is to create that next level up. They, for instance, just now, I've got Carol Rippin at Skegness who's got 9 people that she can't deal with. She needs help to help them to deal with their drugs and their alcohol. Yes, they're robbing shops, they're doing all sorts of things. This service, if we can get these people on the ground, they will take time to work with these people because you're quite right, they don't want help. Yeah. They're doing what they want to do, they're sitting on a street corner, and that's what they're quite happy to do. So this is the next level up. That data analysis that you were talking about, we need to collate all that data. We need to try and understand what the pattern is. And yes, you're right, where they're getting the drugs from, and so that we can feed up further on. This is just a little level here. It's a small level of what we're doing within the council and within the police and within the probation service, within the NHS. But it will all fit together, because 9 times out of 10, these people will end up in A&E on a Saturday night, overdosed. What do they do with them? The nurses can't deal with them. You know, they're going to get violent, so then you get the police. What do they do with them? They're going to stick them in a cell for 24 hours. That's not going to do any good, because all they're going to do again is tomorrow they're going to do the same thing. So yeah, it is a complex, I understand that, and it is hard to understand, but it is a level that is needed out there. And I'm sure Karen will agree that, you know, within the hospitals and the police, it is just a never-ending circle, and it is hard to break, but this is one level that we are trying to do.
Yeah, I think they just got to watch back to that priority. If you're not careful, the police will go for a little quick win, which is easy to do and just actually isn't really big in the big scheme of the picture. Actually getting the heroin dealers and the real ones is a lot more complicated, and often half the time I just think it's too difficult. I just go for the little easy win, and that's you've got to avoid that situation.
I think my experience of working with the police has been positive. In fact, on Tuesday next week, I'm going to a senior police officers meeting in Lincolnshire because they've asked me to go and help them understand some of the key challenges, and that they've got specific activities that are ongoing around county lines around trying to break drug supply chains. But what they're really interested in understanding is what more we can do collectively around prevention of drug and alcohol treatment. Drug and alcohol challenges across the county. So, and that was a proactive reach out. So I think we are working collaboratively in this space, but there is a lot more that we can still do. I think Councillor Bowkett makes a really good point. Like, this is it's adding to the core service that we've already got. A lot of this work is around assertive outreach, making sure that we can go out to people who we know are much more likely, from our analysis of understanding and from talking to people across Lincolnshire, of where some of our key challenges are around people who are using drugs and or alcohol, often together, lots of whom don't want to engage in treatment for a whole range of reasons. The vast majority, or a lot of these posts, are about assertive outreach, so getting out into those organisations, into those communities, and a lot of this is working collaboratively with key partners to make sure that we have drug and alcohol workers become a core part of wider teams across the community, so that we've got that better reach out with our specialist support around drugs and alcohol. So I think that is important. We have been really successful with recruitment for the 22-23 funding. So I think it's 54 posts have been filled already, which is why we've seen that caseload drop for the generic drug workers. And we are evaluating this really closely to make sure we understand what's working well and what's not working well to inform our recommissioning and what we do next.
Okay, Karen, and then Tracy.
Thanks, Chair. It's where to start with this, isn't it? I know the area that I represent, yes, there's a drugs problem, but that's not unusual. It's like that right across society, and I think the reasons for that problem are very varied. It's never just one reason why someone uses drugs or alcohol to self-medicate, and I think that the grinding poverty that people face at present, a lot of people in rural areas as well as in urban areas, that is contributing to the spiral as well. And I really don't know what the answer is. But another thing, you mentioned policing. Well, at full council last Friday, we talked about the cuts to PCSOs and the role of the PCSOs. To me, the PCSOs, they were always the one. They knew what was going on underneath, and people would talk to PCSOs when they might not talk to a police constable, for instance, you know. And the fact that we're cutting them, well, that's really bad, you know, because that's going to have an impact as well. And like you, I think we absolutely have to do something about drugs in society, but this, to me, with the very best, noblest of intentions, is just scratching the surface. I really think so, you know, and it is all those other things, and I'm still going to keep harping back. We should not be cutting those PCSOs. That will have an impact, because they're part of that network that helps the police find out what's happening and where, and that's if they've got the numbers of police officers to deal with it in the way that they'd like to deal with it. It's just a huge problem, isn't it? And I just don't know how we tackle it. I really don't, but this does feel a little bit like scratching the surface, and that's not knocking it. It's good to try, but I don't know how effective it will be. Thank you.
Tracy?
I don't think anyone's surprised to know I have challenges in relation to this service anyway. What I'm trying to understand is, within the report, it's saying we had an increase of 1.4 last year in this current year, so as though we're drawing to a close to it. It also mentions that on page 56, the post that was implemented are operating well, and initial feedback on the impact of the post has been positive. Surely it shouldn't be initial feedback, because we're near at the end of 22-23, so actually we should already be knowing how well they're working. But which of those roles were the new ones? And are all of these that's listed in the paper, in this chart, are they completely new on top of what's already there? And then within that, there's 100 million questions, which, don't worry, I'm not going to ask them all, about the actual role. So a young Oasis service, what is that? I'm guessing Lincoln-based, possibly, not across our whole district. We're only going for one naloxone coordinator, but then we're looking at treatments, we're looking at also prevention. a drug-related death coordinator. Well, my assumption of what that role is, it's certainly not dealing with treatment and it's certainly not dealing with prevention. It's dealing with the fact that all of that failed. And we're employing 2 of those people within that. We're only spending £3,000 on naloxone kits. That cannot be giving as many kits there. The housing support, it's got there on 16 and 18 specialist housing support workers. Exactly the same description on 16 and 18. So are they different? Are they the same people? It's saying that we got the rough sleeper support money in November. Have we been sitting on that, or have we been doing something with it? I would hope that we've been spending it and doing something with it, because we've just been through winter and actually we've had sweat, we've brought these people in. Have we been working with them in regards to obviously prevention services and things? So for me, there's been targets set nationally that we're going to be reaching 53% of opiate users over this period of time with this money nationally. I think we'd all be overjoyed if 53% of all of our residents were treated for it. I don't think we'll probably reach the 3%, if I'm honest. And I don't think this is getting anywhere near what it needs to do. And if the budget is being increased by, I think, was it 48%, what we normally spend on this service, then I think we can do better than what we're suggesting that we can do with it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I'll try and answer as many of those as I managed to write down as you were going through them.
Actually, you don't need to, Simon. Your best bet, summarise it up, because I think it can be summarised. Thank you.
So essentially, everything that's on here is new funding. This doesn't include the service that we commission, the substance misuse service. So this provides all of these grants overall provide us with an extra 54 staff. 3 of which are within the council. Of that 54 staff, we've already got 89 staff. When you look at your heroin users, we want to get 53% into treatment nationally. Lincolnshire are above the national average. We're already at nearly 50%. So we're not that far away from that already. But it is a challenge. That other 3% are a very, very challenging cohort to try and engage with. And that's where we need to put some effort into trying to engage with that cohort. The drug-related death coordinator is one post. There's a substance misuse specialist post, and there's a drug-related death coordinator who also manages, it sits within Alina's team, and also manages all of the grant contracts as well. So that's a part-time drug-related death coordinator, part-time contract manager for the grants. And the analyst post, for example, the one that you were saying where we got extra funding, that post, we were actually advised by DLUC, where that post sits within the grants, because the monitoring of the grant is so extensive, essentially, that you need analytical support to be able to just complete the submissions.
Yeah.
Sorry, Simon. You've just said within that, and thank you, that we've already reached, I think you said 50% of our heroin users. How does someone become one of those statistics? Because I'm quietly confident that there's not a reduction of 50% heroin users in my division. So how would you know about these people? It's only if they're going to be on a methadone program or something like that they're going to become one of your statistics. People buy in, do not kind of sign a chart and sign in to say, oh, by the way, I'm a user around here. So it'd be interesting to know where those people become a figure, to know that we're even reaching anywhere near any percent.
Yeah.
As part of the National Drug Treatment Monitoring System that we're a part of, that's run by OHID, they provide us with national or county estimates of the amount of drug users that we've got and drinkers per annum. So we base the percentages based on how many people we have in treatment, in structured treatment, against the estimates of how many people they're saying that we've got in Lincolnshire.
Okay. So, Mark and then Marianne.
Yeah, thanks. So I read this interest because there seems to be a lot of these sort of government schemes at the moment that sort of come down with funding for certain things with very, very tight timescales that you have to sort of agree and sign up for. And you don't sort of really have the chance to sort of give the ideas a great deal of scrutiny or sort of, you know, look through it. It's the same with the district. It's the same as the district council. It's really frustrating. It turned out, obviously, aware of some of the comments that have been made. I do have some concerns that obviously, you know, yes, we probably do have to take the money because, but is there any? You know, do we have to take it? What would happen if we were to say, oh, we don't want it? You know, that's just a hypothetical question. Hypothetical question on that, because obviously I'm guessing that we wouldn't, because we know there's demand. But the question has been raised about, you know, this is only going to be dealing with, you know, the surface. So I think I made at the last Adult Scrutiny Committee the comment that I think the crime stats say that roughly it's about 89% of acquisitive crime in this country, whether it's robbery or burglary or street crime, is users getting the money to purchase, you know, drugs. So obviously we have to do something about it. My also concern is obviously this is going to supplement our current service. Is there any indication that we have to match this funding from the government, or would our own expenditure potentially increase? Because I'm guessing that if we start to identify more and more substance misuse users, potentially we could use up all of this grant. I mean, before very long, actually into having to find, because once we've identified the need, we're going to have to treat it. So is there a risk that we may actually end up by burning through the whole grant and then having to find, and then have to supplement it from with our own resources as well?
So just in terms of do we have to take the money, we want to take the money because we think even if this is for a finite period of time, we should be able to, with this additional resource, get out and make much better connections with people in our communities who need our help with their drug and alcohol misuse, dependency, harmful use, whatever that might be. And so for as long as we can get the extra funding, we're going to take it and run with it. The other thing is that we can use it, we are using this to test out some new ways of working and some different approaches that are much more outreach focused than having kind of centres where people come in for treatment. It might be that actually what we learn is that's a much better effective model of delivery, and for our longer term core substance misuse treatment, that might be the direction of travel we wanted to go in. So I think there are some real opportunities here, although notwithstanding all the challenges around this is to a degree scratching the surface of a bigger problem. We don't have to match fund, but we do have to keep our public health grant spending on substance misuse at 2020-21 levels, which so the funding that we use for our core service has to stay at the same level. Otherwise, we risk losing all of the additional funding. But that's something that we manage with Derek, with colleagues in public health and across the organisation to make sure that that's sustainable. And we do have good relationships with OHID, and as I know, do colleagues in other areas who are having similar. I mean, the whole country is kind of going through this whole process, so we are also learning from each other and making sure that we are challenging back to the Department for Health and Social Care and OHID and other teams where we really need to, because the ask is unsustainable or unachievable.
Okay. Simon?
Yeah, can I just address a couple of bits that you brought up there? Scrutiny of the bids. We did a lot of partnership working as part of developing the bids. So that wasn't just with our provider, it was with all of our key stakeholders as well. So there's quite a robust process in order to be able to identify the gaps that we wanted to plug first. And when it comes to scratching the surface, the funding, the national funding, is split into 3 years. There's the year one, all councils across the country are split into group 1, 2 or 3. Lincolnshire are in group 2. That means that the money that we've had to date for this year, for last year and this year, is what they call holding money. Next year, 23-24, is our year 1 funding. In year 2, it nearly doubles. And the predictions that have been given to the counties that are in front of us, between year 2 and year 3, it doubles again. So yes, we are scratching the surface. We're in year one of our funding. Hopefully the funding will go up over the next 2 years following that.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing then potentially, as you've said, if the funding's going up, you'll be coming back to us to say, actually, we're going to need more and more workers, more and more Irish workers, because presumably this expenditure is mainly around recruiting people to go out and deal with people, as it were. So potentially there could be in future years more outreach workers coming into post and stuff like that. I'm guessing all these have to be trained. I mean, is there enough people out there skilled in this particular type of work? Because potentially, if the government are up in the ante on this, and more councils are going to be getting more and more funding, are they also putting money in to get so that people can be trained to do this? Also, I'm guessing it's a very, very specialist type of work.
Yes, is the answer to that. Essentially, there's a whole new framework that's due to come out shortly from the government around competencies and around training packages that are all being developed nationally. We have packages in place at the moment. It does take time. And one of the reasons that you've got a bit of a lag in between the money coming in and us being able to show how effective it's been is the fact that it takes quite a long time to train people up to be effective, and you can't just throw them in and give them a big caseload. No, they have to build up slowly and build their skills up. But we are doing that now. We are waiting for the new package from the government, which we've been promised will come in the next few months.
Okay, thank you. I've got Marianne, then Karen, and then hopefully we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. Just very simply, the proportion of increase, and I think others have asked a similar question. You said it's 54 new staff on top of 89, I think. So you're saying that this is around getting on for 50% increase, more than 50% increase in the total budget of the service spent. Is that the size of the increase?
Essentially, it's probably a little bit disproportionate, because the main budget pays for all the premises and all the medication and all the things that are not staffing costs, if you like. What we've been able to do with the grant funding is primarily concentrate on manpower, on people, to enable us. Initially, what we wanted to do was get those caseloads down, which improves our quality. Once we improve our quality, our outcomes start to improve. Once we improve our outcomes, our throughput starts to improve, so we end up with more people going through treatment. As we then increase the workload, the capacity increases. So we've been able to do that. The funding, essentially, because the other funding pays for all the infrastructure, it's probably a disproportionate amount of people that's been employed, if you look at it from a percentage-wise.
Thank you. And that's just for this forthcoming. That's just this forthcoming year, because you don't know yet what the budget's going to be after, when you said I think it's 2 years. On the, is that not right? Yeah.
We're having fun with those today, aren't we? Yeah, that is right. So we've got an indicative amount. They've told us what it might be, but they won't actually confirm it until early next year, probably. But it's built into our recommissioning, so the approach that we take in future years will be kind of more rounded for the whole service.
That's great. And just one other thing, just to raise, I don't think this is something you can do about now necessarily, but as you take in more cases and you've reduced the caseload, which I think is great, you do also need more support for those people doing the work. The stress and the problems that, you've got more of those people, you may actually need to have more backup support for those frontline workers, and presumably that's in there somewhere. Thank you.
Okay, Karen.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to come back. Lucy's comment about outreach workers, I would absolutely, unequivocally support that. I remember some years ago I went out with a man who worked for an agency who supported homeless people from the county council, and we went out at 5 in the morning in Lincoln city centre, and it was just shocking. And it was when they were taking that drug that made them go like statues, and there was an absolute explosion of it. And You know, none of those people would have ever gone into a treatment centre, but by Johnny going out to them, you know, they got that treatment. So actually, I think that is worthwhile. It's just the wider aspect of going into our communities, places like where I live, and tackling it. It's a bit of a bottomless pit, really, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay. Right, I'll summarise up then. I think overall we've had a very good debate, and we've perhaps highlighted some of the areas that sort of are of concern. I think just bringing it back to this particular item, it is the middle bit of a three-piece strategy, which is the recovery and the treatment programme, the housing-related support, which I hope is half decent, and you're not sort of, and it's about relocating, I suppose, some people away from areas. I don't know, but there's one thing which does seem to come out is that the funding at least is linked to what the government is giving us, so we haven't got a risk of sort of shortfalls, and also that basically the contracts are linked in with the funding in particular, and it seems though it's going to escalate, but at least we are where we are and we know the bigger picture. If government gives you money, take it. That's definitely my motto, whichever way. And Trevor needs to turn his microphone. Trevor needs to turn his microphone. Right, okay. So, your mic's on, Trevor. So, in effect, take the money and and I would say, make the best use out of it for the people of Lincolnshire. And if we can help those, great. As for going to the executive, any comments? I still think priority is essential. Where prevention needs to be in there. I know it's not necessarily all about prevention, but we should always have prevention in there. Outcome focus and benchmarking needs to be put into place, which will link into priorities, and react for 2024-25 and take this year as what we're going to learn for next year to sort of set it up and embed it better into the system. I think there's a lot to be learned. You know, the drug strategy, from everything I know from what the government's approach and aims are, actually it's all right. We've all seen wonderful strategies, but my God, if you don't connect it with what goes on the ground floor, you will never deliver a strategy, and that's one of the problems with the drug strategy. It is quite a diverse and changing cultures. I tell you what, when a pint starts costing about £5 to £7.50 in a pub, it doesn't half make sure that the youth won't be going into pubs, and actually, therefore, they're out looking at other areas of entertainment. And so if you want to shift, these are these are things that are what creates cultures. You know, it's because actually, in my day, you could go to a pub. Today, the youth can't afford to go and have a pint. So what are they going to do? They're going to hang out in the area. The dynamics change. People change. You know, they'll go to houses and drink in houses from supermarkets. You know, that's the culture that we live in. We adapt. And if you can't afford to go somewhere, we still get the hits and kicks from somewhere, which is why we need to be adaptable. But I think for the key message has got to be outcome focus and benchmarking to the executive. Any other comments anyone wants to put in? Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think we should put in there as well that we should use the media, whatever way possible, to highlight the dangers. I know we say it, and it's sometimes as national programmes, but if we could maybe target that within Lincolnshire and highlight particular cases to try and persuade young people or even older people to stay away from drugs. And your comment earlier about there's no mention in this about working with the police, but I think that as on the prevention side, or trying to get rid of the dealers, that should be part of the strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, generally we don't give messages like we did in my day. I mean, everybody can remember Zamo from Grange Hill and the issues he got into and how it all escalated. But today we don't actually, we expect our kids to know things rather than actually bang home messages, you know, and it is damage and impact, Karen.
There were two things really. I wondered if we could put something in about we'd particularly like to see some emphasis on outreach workers. And I don't mean just homeless people, I mean, you know, out in our communities. That was one. And just the other one, given there seemed to be broad consensus on Friday about the cutting of PCSOs, just to say that again, we feel that that will have an impact. Thank you.
Well, technically an officer, a detective or undercover officer could be better than a PCSO, but anyway, that's the police department and we're not here for police.
Just to say, with respect though, it's something that's having an impact, and you know, by cutting them, you're cutting the police dealing with tackling this problem. So I would argue that it is a material consideration.
No, I take your point, but my view is the police have their budgets and they have their resources as much as we here in adults have to make ours match as well. Wendy?
Yeah, just to clarify, the outreach workers are with the districts. This is the next stage up. So you've got all your out workers, which Lucy and Simon, that they work with the districts. They're all going around like with your. At the moment, Lincoln's got 11 bad rough sleepers. They'll be working with those daily. You know, morning, noon, and night. They'll be out there. They'll be doing the counts. This is the next level up to help those outreachers that's going out.
Okay, we're all happy with those comments, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. I've listened to this with real interest, and I feel actually that there's been a lot of background work being going on that we haven't yet heard or we've not been party to, because the work is discreet and it's confidential. And also for the funding, we have to be successful, obviously, for it to increase year upon year. So I would like to see it come back with a report on how successful it's been, but also maybe it might be useful for the panel that we have some, maybe a closed session, I don't know, where we can look at casework to understand the complexities around it, so that when we get things like this come to scrutiny, we're better prepared to scrutinise and understand at the next level, which is what Wendy's been trying to discuss. You know, maybe we need a better understanding, more discrete information, but on a much more closed session, so that we get a better understanding of what the officers have been doing, how they've built up to this, how they've worked to it, so that then we can better scrutinise and understand. Thank you.
Yeah, well, what we try and do with scrutiny is to sort of theme things so that it all, when we, like today, you'd have more of a theme on it. Basically, the debate is actually, we've got to understand what the contract's about. And actually, the contract's actually all okay, and it's there to sort of go forward. So in effect, you've done just a good job. It's just that when this arrived as a paper, we've given it a right good airing. The executive might not quite be as patient as what we've been to sort of get through it. So just, you know where we come from now. But, yeah, and you're right. Andrew.
Sorry, can I just add what Karen was just saying? I agree with you, Karen. I brought this up about my concern with PCSOs, and it's the intelligence level on the street. And I absolutely think it's a valid comment that we can make without interfering with the police budgets, which are their budgets. But I think we all showed concern at full council about this. And since we're talking about it today, it's a good forum to restate our concerns about this cut to PCSOs.
No, I mean, they do a great job. But I thought the motion at the end was that actually they're going to all talk about sort of things.
Can we take a vote from committee and see how many of us feel
Well, hold on. No, we're not getting involved in policing. It's not our budget here. We're involved in adults and this contract, so I'm sticking with the contract. Right, we've all said for the executive. Yep, we're all okay. You've got the notes, Simon. All right, all those in favour? Actually, I need a proposer first and a seconder, so we'll start with that.
Chairman, can we just say that we support your comments, and we would like to add a comment that other services will need to be maintained if this is to be really successful. Thank you.
Okay. Right, proposer? Mike? Seconder? Andrew? Okay, all in favour? Great, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Simon?
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, if we could just look at page 82, as has already been mentioned earlier in the meeting, the item on the 5th of April on the carers service will be now taken in the autumn, probably at the October meeting. Apart from that, there are no other changes to the programme, Chairman. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And that was for the work programme, for those listening in. Okay, well, thank you all very much. And I think we've had a fair old debate today, so but there's been a lot of valid points there, and I think it's good to get officers actually knowing where our line of thoughts are at times and what we think, you know, works and happens on the streets of and in our wards, districts, divisions. So thank you all, and have a good rest of the day.